It's nice now. It's nice now. I can
Yeah.
see the shine on your head, and I say that
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
fellow
Yeah.
bald person.
Yes.
Uh,
Solidarity,
we've got to stick together. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Yeah. So I mean, you just you just contacted me. I mean, if you'd like to like introduce yourself to everyone, I know you just
Sure.
started a YouTube channel and everything.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, very new to content creation. You're not going to find much on my channel yet, aside from a few kind of roughly put together debate reviews, which I'll be doing more of. But actually, really, what I'm interested in doing is more of a political project, and this is part of it. But politics isn't done just online, so this is one slice, but not the whole cake, so to speak. But I think socialists don't have a great feeling necessarily of the moment we're in, kind of understanding how to work together broadly, how to avoid, a lot of the toxic elements of like call out culture and other, negative ways of policing each other and communicating, and really like building a broad movement and a broad coalition to actually get stuff done. So that's fundamentally what I'm really interested in. And part of that is, talking to a diverse range of people, and
There's a lot of
understanding where
diversity
they're
on
at.
the screen with me and you. I mean, one person
Yeah,
just remarked that we look like the same person with
we
different
do.
facial hair. Yeah.
We do. Yeah, we might, we might be long lost brothers or something like that. But convincing, giving people an argument, to put it in Ben Burgess's words,
Yeah.
or really interacting in a positive, inclusive, constructive way is something that's really lacking. And I think, to me, it seems like a fundamental part of why, we're not getting stuff done. We're losing all over the world to right wing, resurgence. And, even in, I mean, it's topical even now in this moment with the Israel-Palestine conflict. There's just a fundamental lack of mobilization, organization, and the result is, we can't even put enough political pressure on our governments to intervene in probably one of the most stark, obvious instances where something should and must be done, right? So so that leads me to talking to people, to reviewing debates. Really, what I want to do is understand where people are at, regardless of their profession, country, religion, ideology, and how, basically how can we get more people on our side of the aisle. And so that's, that brought me to one of the kind of main groups of people that are hugely influential in perpetuating the, current system that we're in, which are economists, right? The high priests of capitalism, so to speak. Hugely kind of amorphous discipline with lots of different schools, a plurality of ways of thinking about things. And that's something, I thought we could potentially start with today, is talking about, pluralism in economics. To me, it's even actually a little bit confusing that we can have so much plurality in economics. I'm not an economist, right? So I'm looking in from the outside. So maybe you can teach me a little bit here, but it seems interesting to me that in this discipline, that it appears to me, at least, to think of itself as something very rigorous, very scientific, with lots of testable hypotheses and kind of gold standards of scientific methodology in play. It's odd that there's so much diversity of thought. Like if you would compare economics to something like atomic physics or something, right? Like you don't have 20 different models of an atom or something like that, because it's settled science, right? The areas where you do have plurality is really at the cutting edge, like in quantum research, where it's basically up to interpretations of what we're seeing and trying to come up with best fit explanations. But we lack the tools to really like test what's going on at that level, right? And so I would think that in a discipline where we do have some form of testability, there'd be less diversity of thought. So I'd love to open it there and maybe get your thoughts on why there is even this pluralism to begin with, what it might tell us about economics as a field. And I have my own thoughts on that. I can bounce them off you as well. But what from within the field itself, how is this plurality kind of conceptualized or reconciled with? Because I think you're even in your channel name, right? Unlearning economics. Like there's entire dominant hegemonic ways of thinking in economics that some folks like yourself are actively trying to undo or battle with, right? And come up with alternative models and better arguments. Econoboy mentioned, or he turned me on to Brunig's work, which I was familiar with Brunig's like policy, his Jacobin writing, a lot of his blogging and stuff like that. But I hadn't gone so much deeper into his modeling work and kind of more rigorous hardcore economics work. So I'm looking in from the outside basically and seeing people like you guys fighting internally within the field, right? Advocating for a specific position, a more progressive, maybe you call it socialist position. And is that how you see it as well from, I understand you're professionally, academically involved as well, right? Is that something you experience, in your day-to-day work even?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a lot of questions there, right? Because there's different types of pluralism. I suppose you've got pluralism in the more political sense, in the democratic sense, where you have different factions vying for power or for office, and you have liberals and conservatives and centrists and socialists and whatever. And I think that is, let's say, correlated with some of the pluralism that you would find within the economics discipline, but it's not the same thing. So you have, for instance, you could have very different views about how to look at the behavior of businesses. And that entails a whole range of methodological and political considerations, some that seem quite arcane and some others that seem, directly relevant to policy. So for it would be like a battle between kind of post-Keynesians on one hand, they're sometimes called, or maybe MMT is one version of post-Keynesianism, and the neoclassical economists. And it was a whole big methodological debate. But my personal opinion is that regardless of what the people in that debate thought, underlying that there was a really fundamental difference in views about capitalism and about policy, right? So to be concrete, what I mean is, essentially, if you've got a kind of neoclassical model, a mainstream economic model of how firms work, it would tend to be mathematical. And what the firms do in that, I mean, I don't know how familiar you are with this kind of stuff coming from a political background.
Econ 101 level
Econ
stuff.
101 type stuff, yeah. Yeah, it's like, but it's like just optimization, right? It's optimization models. That's what they use. So it's like profit maximizing firms. Now, it's as obvious, what's the saying, as plain as the nose on my face, that most firms don't literally maximize profits in the way that they can't just like calculate what exactly is optimal, what price exactly is optimal, how much to produce, exactly what inputs to use. No firm can do that. They don't have access to that information. It would be way too complicated. So that's not in dispute. What was in dispute and is in dispute in that debate is whether we then, instead of modeling firms mathematically, ask them what they do. And that was what post-Keynesians did. And some, lots of people have done it, but that would kind of go into a business, right? Hey guys, how do you price? Like, what's going on? How does it work? Seems very sensible to me, but a lot of economists have resisted it and still do resist it, because they're basically like, look at the point is that it's a scientific model. You mentioned the model of the atom. We know that nobody's ever looked at an atom in a microscope and seen the literal like standard model of like the little nucleus with the electrons orbiting it. If you look down at that level, last time I checked, it's just a blur, right? You don't actually know what you're looking at. The point is that's a useful model, and they would say the same thing about business behavior. Now, what's interesting to me is that neoclassical model of business behavior is inherently kind of conservative, because it is a kind of well, let's call it Panglossian view, right? It's like profit maximizing, and then consumers are doing their thing, and that's good for them, and then they meet together in the market equilibrium, and it's, you know, the best of all possible worlds. Whereas if you take the post-Keynesian view, it would be more that, you know, businesses first can make mistakes. First, you know, that they can have much more power to set prices higher, and most importantly, I think that there can be general demand deficiencies in the economy. And if you push demand, it's not going to lead to inflation like the neoclassical story, because the market outcome was already better. So why would you, already the best it could be? So why would you create inflation by pushing demand up from where it should be in the optimal? It's not going to do that in the Keynesian story. Firms might have spare capacity, just from looking at how they actually work and how they don't behave in this optimal way. And so yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess the answer is that there are two related but distinct debates around pluralism, and I think we're all kidding ourselves. I mean, Milton Friedman, who really was the guy who, apart from, you know, you'll know him for all his free market capitalist views, but he wrote the methodological paper about this. And he was really strongly committed to this instrumental view, right? That it doesn't have to be literally true. You don't have to look at what businesses do. And then Friedman later said, you know, it's amazing to me that my economics and my politics are completely separate, and my economics is purely objective, and yet I've come to the same conclusion in both of them. I was like, mate, you are absolutely kidding yourself. So yeah, I think we're kidding ourselves if we don't think the two are related. But certainly, you know, I mean, you can find very progressive people who believe in Keynesianism in some form, who would prefer the modeling vision of economics, right? So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's complicated essentially, what pluralism means to me in economics.
Yeah, maybe I can even press this a little bit further. I'm repeating myself a little bit from my discussion with Econoboy, but really I'm just parroting Yanis Varoufakis here. He's sort of he sort of made the claim that economics is actually like a distinct type of research program, in that what we just, like what you just mentioned, there's some sort of interconnection, right, between politics and economics. He illustrated it through like a drunk financer, basically, right? Someone works on the stock exchange. This mythical person has called every downturn in the stock market ever. They go out to the bar one night, they get drunk, they tweet out, you know, hey, this stock market's going to crash tomorrow. And the stock market crashes the next day, not because, you know, there was some actual underlying, you know, financial asset that went bad that, you know, led to a 2008 type crisis or something. It was just because people were on Twitter and trusted this person. And I think the point he's trying to illustrate is like we're studying a social system, and the social system includes actually how we study it and how we think about the economy. And because of that, like a lot of, from, you know, within the field itself, a lot of the stories that economists tell themselves about what they're actually doing when they go to work may not be kind of the whole picture. It may in some cases be false. So I guess the point I'm making is, to me, pluralism seems like a symptom of an more like an underlying maybe crisis or tension in the field. And I wonder if you feel the same way, that in some ways the stories that we tell in economics about the economy and how it works are actually maybe informed first by our political values and personal values and beliefs about, you know, what is fair in the economy, what is an equal or ethical distribution of buying power and goods and all those sorts of things. And maybe, and I you know, I'd love you to persuade me out of this idea, because if it's true, we've got maybe some problems on our hands. But if that's true, then in pluralism, I see really a political fight within the field, a fight about, you know, how do we want to structure things, and how do we want to treat people, and how do, you know, we have a market, great, a market can distribute in all sorts of ways, but primarily, in the simplest terms, it's going to distribute scarce resources based on buying power. So, the starving single mother who can't, buy milk for her, newborn or something like that will lose out in the market against the rich family who wants to buy milk for their cat. Is that, we have to make decisions about those sorts of situations and what we should do in them. So for me, I look at someone like you and Matt and Econoboy, actually, and I see arguments being made from a set of values, and not necessarily just from like, I really think this is the best way to, increase GDP or distribute more things or push up standards of living within the framework of economics. I don't know if that resonates with you or not.
Yeah, I mean, look, I tend to agree with Hume, right? Reason is and ought to be the slave of the passions, and I do think that values inevitably come up in economics. I mean, whether you pursue efficiency at the expense of equality is one of the main ones, and you'll see that in economics textbooks. But I do think there's a realm in which you can have pluralism and disagreements, even among people who share broadly similar values. And I think part of that is because evidence is it's so tricky in economics, it really is difficult to settle a question definitively, scientifically, in the way that you can with a controlled experiment in physics or something. I mean, I'll give you an example, right? Like I have been known to criticize the Marxist labor theory of value. Mostly,
I saw your video on value.
Oh, you saw
maybe
that?
We can talk about that a bit too.
Okay,
yeah.
Mostly, not. It's kind of the narcissism of small differences in some ways, but it's like mostly I don't like the statistical evidence that the average Marxist produces in favor of the labor theory of value. I don't think it's any good. Whether or not there are other arguments for the labor theory of value. Well, in fact, there are other arguments in favor of using the labor theory of value in some way, shape or form, and I've always accepted that. But I don't buy, for example, the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. I really don't think, the most of the work on that I think is wholly unsatisfactory. Now, what's interesting is that your average Marxist, I mean, it's tricky on the internet, right? But I do think your average Marxist I share a lot of values with, and I do basically want to see socialism. Now, that doesn't mean your average tanky, and I don't know what the overlap is between people who believe in the TRPF and people who defend Stalin. Probably too much, but
far too much.
Yeah.
yeah.
But I think that I can have a disagreement with somebody about the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, which I think a lot of Marxists see that as a kind of inbuilt failure mechanism of capitalism, right? They're like, the rate of profit falls and capitalism just can't function anymore, and then you get some kind of crisis, labor gets attacked, whatever happens, a whole bunch of bad stuff happens, and then capitalism may resolve itself, or it may collapse, or we may have socialism. So that's what they see. Now I feel, and it's funny you're talking about values, because before I spoke to you I thought I'd sort of brush up on my socialism. I just reread G.A. Cohen's Why Not Socialism, sorry, which is basically a value-based sort of exposition of why we would want socialism. And he basically says in it explicitly, I value community, I value equality, sometimes over whatever benefits the market has. And I tend to agree with that, and I think most Marxists would tend to agree with that. But what you see, with the TRPF or in your average economics seminar, back when I was an academic, I'm not anymore, but you will see a bunch of people who don't really necessarily disagree on an ideological level, but they might just be like, I don't believe your statistical finding here. I just don't think that you've done a very good job of demonstrating that the Portuguese drug decriminalization had no effect on weed use, or whatever question they're asking, right? So there is scope for that, but I think and there's a lot of scope for those kinds of disagreements, but I do think that they're secondary in a lot of ways to what you spoke about with values, because the disagreement I have with somebody about the TRPF is absolutely, it's so far away from like an economist who won't even ask what the rate of profit is, why we care about who isn't asking
Right.
about financial crises, who doesn't think that's a situation of first order concern. I mean, Robert Lucas, the famous macroeconomist who died this year, he it was Nobel Prize winning. He famously argued that recessions just weren't that important. In terms compared to long term growth, right? So that was his value based on some mathematics. But like, I'm not gonna. What kind of discussion can I have with him about the niceties of the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, when he doesn't even care about crises in capitalism in the same way that a Marxist does? That's not his. His MO, right? So
Right.
yeah, I mean, I think it's a really significant issue. By the way, everyone, Varoufakis does put it really well in that talk. I forget what the name of the talk is, but he
Yeah.
talks about it really effectively.
Yeah, no, that's a really, like, if anyone takes anything away from this conversation, it's to probably go watch that talk. I think it's
That
probably one
that
of
that seconded, yeah.
yeah, it's brilliant. I mean, it's fundamental. So actually, in terms of these, like, who I would call, the high priests, right? I'm really gesturing to a specific function I think that they're playing within our social system, our society, and that is to, like, just like you said, like, I think I mentioned, or you mentioned, you were on your last live stream that I caught, you were researching Thomas Sowell because you wanted to do
Yeah.
a thing on him. Yeah. And this whole kind of class of, like, market fundamentalist type thinker, like neoclassical thinkers, are obviously not, like, dumb, but they say dumb things like, who cares about recessions, which on its face is like, well, there's such a plethora of obvious reasons that involve, like, what people experience during a recession, that it's obviously undesirable if you're in any way looking seriously at the problem. And the Marxist in me, right? My Marxist analysis of that is like, well, they have interests, within their profession, within their life, within their social life, of ignoring those things on purpose, and those things completely shape their thinking and contort their thinking into these strange, mental gymnastics to make sense of the fact that we have these beautiful, I think Yadis compares, like, the most rigorous, well-developed mathematical models within economics to works of art, right? And obviously, I think there's something to that. They're hypnotizing in some way, and they describe a system so pristine, and if we can just tune the gears right and oil the right places, we can create this amazing economic machine, and it will go endlessly and generate all sorts of innovation and blah blah blah. And they have that kind of up on a pedestal, and they have all of these other class interests basically pushing them to keep it on a pedestal and not look at it too hard, lest they may in some way jeopardize their own position in society. And so that's like, really, if that's true, which I strongly believe it is, that's a really difficult type of person, right, in this political project I'm interested in, to fight against, because they have the college education, they have the class status in society, and very seemingly complicated knowledge and technical theories and all sorts of stuff about how things work and how they have to work. And then a socialist comes along and says, well, I think things should work differently.
Yeah.
And they go, well, no, you don't know all of this stuff, and they essentially gatekeep that, right? And actually, what I would maybe even levy against you, and I mean this in the kindest way possible, is I almost feel that same desire from you and Econoboy to have, like, labor theory value, right? Perfect example.
Sure.
I think maybe one of the biggest mistakes for Marxists was getting too far into economics before fighting the political battles first, the battles on values and philosophy, because once we enter your space, your realm of thought, there is no argument, there's no statistics that I think will satisfy the bar, the rigorous bar, which I think is good. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think there are arguments in that realm that a socialist can make that will really make it over that bar. And so obviously, you know, your reaction, Econo Boy's reaction might be, well, like the statistics aren't good, and so we don't have that rigorous scientific, you know, threshold met for these arguments. But maybe this is, let me just maybe give a very concrete example. The ending of slavery in this country, in the United States, was not done because it was economically advantageous. In fact, there was a huge war fought over the fact that it was really disastrous, economically speaking, for the South. And within that conversation at that time period, there were great arguments being made that have never, Chomsky talks about this, I think, all the time. There were wonderful arguments being made by Southerners for why, actually not just on economic grounds, but on value grounds, why the institution of slavery should not be ended. A good example being something along the lines of, well, you know, Northerners rent their work and we own our work. And so we take better care of our assets, where you can, you know, abuse and use and exploit your workers. And so really we have the moral high ground, right? And I think there's maybe even there's something in that hasn't, obviously the point about slaves is completely ridiculous, but there's something in the charge they levied against the North that still hasn't been reconciled. Nonetheless, we ended slavery, and it was, there would have been no economic arguments at the time for ending it. It was hugely productive and profitable for the Southern economy. And I would say now we have the exact same problem in my mind. And maybe, you know, just to be very clear about what socialism means to me, and defining such a broad historic term is really important, I think. When I say socialism, I'm talking about the socialism that preceded Marx, the socialism that influenced the French Revolution, right? This was a political argument and not a economic argument about how to, you know, let's make more worker co-ops and blah 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 blah. It was an argument about, look, when you enter a workplace, when you go about your life in society, should you have the same freedoms you expect from your government, right? Should you have the same level of democracy and say in and control over your life? And the socialist answer to that, and what I advocate for, is obviously yes, is to collapse the worker owner distinction, just like we collapse the slave master distinction. And so it's so I hope you kind of get what I'm saying, where when I come into discussions like with Econo Boy, which if people go check out, I think this will be obvious. I'm planning to do a kind of a recap on it, explaining this, but he's looking for a model. He's looking for, show me the proof that getting rid of capitalists will be beneficial in economic terms. And I don't know if that is even the right question to be asking. And breaking, kind of the fundamental point I'm making is, we need economists. Like, socialists need economists on our side to make the arguments for us within those spaces and help kind of battle, right, the high priesthood. And if we can't even have a discussion about the right things, I think we're just going to keep losing. So I don't know what you think about that, but that's kind of where I'm at, and why I'm interested in speaking with folks like you to try and really understand how the field works and how we can mobilize people in the field.
You know, it's funny. I actually, about maybe a year ago, maybe a bit more, I had an interview to be like the chief economist of a big union here in the UK, and I was kind of considering it because I wanted to leave academia. I didn't want to leave YouTube, but it just seemed like such a cool role for someone like me. It was like,
do you do YouTube full time now?
Yeah, I do.
That's awesome. That's so cool.
I do that. So I had that, and it seemed like such a fitted role. And I think one of the things which came through and is part of the reason I didn't get the job in the end, even though the interviews actually went quite well, was that, you know, it was seen by both me and the union itself that economics had increasingly become the language of power, that it had become the language of policy, that their whole thing was, you know, they were updating, they were modernizing, right? And part of modernizing meant not just having white men anymore, that was one part of it, and the other part meant having credible economic arguments. But I was like, yeah, sure, I completely agree with that, and that goes back to what you and I have been talking about values, right? I shared the same values as them, and I share the same values roughly as you as well. Like, and socialists and anarchists and social democrats even probably do share those values. But I mean, again, you know, as with what I said about neoclassical economics, there is a range of empirical questions that we can ask where, if you could convince me that something was consequentially bad enough, you know, I would tolerate. In fact, it's not even hypothetical, right? For example, I am a market socialist, right? And one of the things that Cohen talks about in it is in Why Not Socialism is he says literally everybody, when market economies first started emerging, from Adam Smith to Karl Marx to, you know, what casual observers, accepted that markets were kind of intrinsically horrible. You know, treating people as just a transaction, you know, not just giving something to somebody instead of, you know, selling it. That's we wouldn't tolerate that in most areas of our lives, inside the home, inside the family, even inside the firm. A camping trip is the example Cohen uses, right? But the question is, in terms of a very complex, globally coordinated economy, are they a necessary evil? And my answer is, I genuinely wish they weren't, but I really think that they are. Now, the market economy has gone too far, and, you know, we can talk about exactly how, for sure. But I would tolerate that necessary evil because I believe that it produces better outcomes in terms of the complex global economic system. So all that is to say, you know, there are questions where I wish that I could say, abolish markets and, you know, we'll have just full communism, right? In terms of, not in terms of central planning, in terms of the more communitarian style, right? That's what I want.
Style,
you know, yeah, the Star Trek style or the anarchist style or whatever. That's what I want in my heart, right? You know, so anarchism of the heart, social democracy of the head, or something, I don't know. But like, I just don't think that there are sufficient workable alternatives thus far. And I'm happy to have them demonstrated to me, but for me that is an empirical question, right? And so this is when I was having the interview with the trade union, and it seemed like they didn't care about that, which was what caused a divide between me and them, because I was like, wait a minute. They were like, economics is pure propaganda. And I was like, whoa. Not pure propaganda, right? Like, you can't just make shit up and be like, this is trade union economics and all other economics is like corporation economics, you know. So I'm still slightly bitter about that, by the way, because they stopped replying to my emails. So I'm just getting it out. But that aside, like, you know, that was the difference that I saw. And so there's a range of questions still that are empirical for me, and I'm willing to accept necessary evils. But also, so there's a bound, right? It's like, am I willing to accept slavery? No, of course. And in a way, slavery, it doesn't, sometimes when people ask this question, it doesn't make sense to me, because slavery is a form of ownership, and the person who is enslaved is still there, right? If you abolish the institution of slavery. So when the idea that they might not produce when they weren't enslaved doesn't fully make sense to me, because they're still there. It's just a question of ownership claims. But there are other questions where I think it's a bit more morally ambiguous, and it's also empirically ambiguous, which that's why I can settle on, you know, within this gray area that isn't slavery, you know, but also isn't a completely crashing economy or something like that, you know.
Yeah. Well, you know, I don't know if you've heard Giannis say this, but I basically just rip all your good ideas from other people. Everyone watching, it's the easiest way to get it done.
I agree.
Yeah. He talks about freeing markets from capitalism, and unshackling them from capitalism, and you know, keeping them within proper scopes, right? I think he says like, you know, I like markets for potatoes, maybe not for healthcare, right? Coming from a U.S. space. So because you're when you're implementing a market, yes, you're gaining a tremendous amount of sort of automatic coordination capability and kind of almost magical planning, but on the basis of buying power. And so when there's inelasticity in supply, or there's other factors, it's probably not a good idea to have a market. But as a tool, I actually don't even necessarily see them as necessarily a negative thing. They are kind of a system, and however you employ them is going to determine the outcomes that come from that. And so really it's about the application and not the system itself. And so when that, I would also qualify myself as a market socialist, but a market socialist, specifically emphasizing the prior point I made, which is getting rid of this class distinction, right, between capitalists and everyone else, between the Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk crowd, and very, very few people in that club, and then everyone else. Kind of it's stratified, yes, but when you juxtapose their wealth and power, right, against everyone else, it's not even close. So maybe what I'm hearing from you is you are, and this is something Econoboy said as well, and I think it's why the Brunig model is so attractive, right? Because it's drawing from the Nordic systems and saying like, look, this works really well, let's push it as far as we can go, and there's all this empirical data and things to back up why we think that's a good thing, and I'm all for that. But my question to Econoboy and my question to you is sort of like, well, what about getting rid of, like, let's do all that. And I don't know if Brunig's model does or doesn't. I think he's waffled a little bit on like, is there any private ownership in your model? And he's like, maybe there a little bit's okay. My question is really like, if we just imagined that model without any of the private ownership, is that better? And Econoboy's answer to this was like, well, I would need to see data, right, showing that removing this class of people did not somehow kind of stop the whole machine from working, profit incentive, private investment, blah, blah, blah. And my response is like, well, I really can't, Mars does not have a completely socialist global economy with no workers and owners, just people working and owning, owning their businesses or something, however you structure it, sovereign wealth funds, blah, blah, blah. There's nothing I can point out there and go, see, it hasn't crashed and burned. And so there's nothing we can do but talk maybe through how we think it might work. And, but we have to agree that it's worth doing in the first place to get rid of, of having those discussions in the absence of empirical evidence. And that's something, I'm wondering for you, is, I don't know how in academia, even in academia, this is certainly the case with how universities and everything are structured. When you enter those spaces, it's less so in academia, but in any workplace, right? You enter a space where your boss has near total control over you. They can tell you when you can and can't go to the bathroom. They can make you write angry, awful emails to customers. They can, do all sorts of things to you. And most importantly, at the end of the year, they get to say, here's your wages for the year. And, I will be retaining this giant pile of money for myself, not because I worked very hard alongside you and we had a discussion and you think it's fair, but because I have a piece of paper, and this piece of paper says, the state says I own this, and if you don't do what I say, I'm gonna pick up a phone and call a building where a bunch of men with batons in blue uniforms are gonna come here in a van and beat the crap out of you, right? Yeah. So that's what I'm interested in getting rid of, and that's not that is it fundamentally changes the economy, but it extends far beyond that. So in your mind, and I think, based on what you just said, I heard a little bit of like, you're kind of okay with some level of this, right? Which I understand, and I don't think that's necessarily even a bad position to hold. But do you find the idea of getting rid of that distinction altogether attractive, regardless of, do we have the data to back it up or not? Is it something you would like yearn for, right, to aim for as a society?
Have you ever watched the channel Loner Box?
I think I've seen a few of his things. Yeah.
Yeah. I really like Loner Box. I used to be a patron of his before I went full time and couldn't afford it. But yeah, like I mean, he had a turn of phrase, and it was in his video on worker co-ops actually that really stuck with me, where he said, the problem with liberals is that they're tragically born without imaginations, which I really liked, and it just I just think about it all the time. So of course, someone like EB, I like EB is my friend. I've got a lot of time for him, but sometimes I do feel that he's got that condition a little bit. And obviously, any leap, before. However small or large a reform is, abolishing slavery, if you can call that a reform, or like introducing the minimum wage, right? You have to do them before you have the evidence for them. The only way you can have evidence for something working economically or politically is if you've tried it, right? Now, you can build a basis on which, you think that it would work based on your in theoretical other understanding and asking other similar questions or whatever, I guess. But ultimately, you've got to take a leap of faith. So, I do see taking those steps as absolutely necessary to enacting some form of socialism. I don't like the idea that you kind of rent yourself out. I think it's kind of sad to agree with the southern slave owners, right? But because they were arguing it for the wrong reasons, because they wanted to own people. But yeah, like you go to work and you rent yourself, and you rent, your employer in principle has complete control over you. They have control over how much you're remunerated. And it's just a type of authoritarianism, and I'm completely against that. I think what this really comes down to, though, the empirical question is, and I think this gets to the heart of what economics is, right? Because economics is highly quantified, and it's highly concerned with measurable outcomes, GDP, efficiency, unemployment, inflation, balance of payments, so on. And I think when you really dig down to the heart of it, what those really represent are values, or things that you could value, right? Right. Of course. So, when Robert Lucas said business cycles don't matter, that's what we call them in economics, a weird name for them, recessions or crises to anyone else. But he said they don't matter. He also said, once you think about the problem of economic development and long-term growth, and you realize how poor some people are while others are so rich, it's pretty hard to think about anything else. So clearly he had values, and I actually think that's a really nice way of putting it. I disagree with him on almost everything, right? And I think what the issue is here is really a question of competing values. And all I'm saying, when I say, if you could empirically demonstrate to me that market socialism is just going to reduce incomes by like fucking 50% or something, lead to a load of unemployment, what that actually means, what that empirical finding means, is that my other values are being compromised by pursuing this anti-authoritarian, anti-hierarchy value that you highlighted about the workplace, right? So that's what's happening. And the empirical evidence that economists focus on, the quantitative evidence, they've just highly scientificized there's a new word, this approach, right? And it can be to an extent because it's quantifiable, because you can measure these things, even though there's a bit of false precision, I think, there. But that's what they're doing. They're taking those values, and then the problem is, obviously, when those values completely dominate, and you're not allowed to conflict with them, and you're not allowed any type of creativity whatsoever in how you approach economics, and you're not allowed to say, because you're not allowed to say really in economics, well, what about the community? What about, like, that is literally like, you would be, well, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 years ago you'd be laughed out of a seminar. Now you probably just get some strange looks, but like, you're not allowed to say things like that. And community, I mean, you can try and quantify that as well if you really want to, but it's not GDP, right? It's not income. So really, we just, I just think we are asking questions about competing values, even when we do empiricism.
It's completely, and I won't in that talk again with Giannis. He has another example about like a middleman in a market stabilizing prices, and that price stability causing, fluctuations in buying power for sellers, and when times are bad for the sellers, if they're growing crops, it means this middleman is really taking food out of their mouth in some sense, by not letting the price rise. And you can look at that and interpret it as a good thing for the bakers who you need the wheat, right, and to bake bread out of. And you can look at it as a bad thing, and care for the farmers who can't buy eggs or something else to sustain themselves. And so his point is, even when we can agree in economics on the empirics, like you have the same number in front of you, the story we tell about the numbers is completely ideological. It's this far more fundamental thing that's informing how we're thinking about stuff, and it makes things incredibly intractable, because when you're talking to any like a market fundamentalist or Ayn Rand fan or something like that, like there's just nothing you can say within the realm of empiricism, because even if even if you look at the same number, you're going to have two conflicting worldviews or models about the whole social fabric and system and human nature and everything else that goes into explaining why the number is what it is. So it's tough, and that's why I think, even like what you're the trade union example you gave, that you're working with them, and I completely that you wanted to work with them, and I completely understand your frustration, that their maybe flippancy or their view of economics was rubbed you the wrong way. But what I would maybe claim is that that's what they're, not in the words I just said, but that's what they're feeling, right? Is like, well, these people that I see on TV on Saturday when I'm resting, like talking about how we need more austerity. I understand your Labor Party is going through a bit of a unraveling, I don't know, like big D Democratic Party here in the States type transformation, and moving away from everything Corbyn was sort of advocating for. I don't know if that's correct. You can correct me. But when they see the people that ostensibly are trying to, or are supposed to be advocating for them, saying we need austerity and, we're having inflation because trade unions are unfairly negotiating, and so we need to, bring out some labor discipline here. And the reason is because economics, right? Here's my economic argument about how the market works and why we need to do that. I would say that's probably, my guess would be, I don't know them, but my guess would be that's what they mean when they say economics is propaganda, because it is in that setting and context, right? That's how they experience it in their day-to-day life. And bridging those sorts of, because you'd be a great asset to them, right, to be able to fight in those battles on their behalf. And so that's the work we have to do, is like finding people where we're at, where they're at, matching up to completely disparate folks. Economists and trade unions are not on the same side. If they were, maybe we could be really doing more within the electoral systems, within political systems, and potentially outside them as well. But until we start working together, it's not going to happen. So I think that's, maybe, I don't know, maybe give them another shot, if you can vent some of your frustration with them, because it might be worthwhile.
It was them that stopped replying to me, by the way, so I don't know if I can.
So maybe not tenable, but
But look, an underlying theme of my channel, which probably isn't hard to spot, is that those people on the news are full of shit. When they talk about something like austerity is good, we can't afford health, education, when they mount their kind of very simplistic defenses of capitalism. I think that is an underlying theme of my channel. I think. I guess part of it though comes down to intellectual honesty with the way I critique the left as well, and the frameworks
Oh
that
yeah.
I find interesting and what that I think need to be discussed and critiqued, and the frameworks that I don't, and just like part of it's like intellectual interest, right? So when I see bad lefty arguments about economics, which are pretty ubiquitous,
They're everywhere. It's crazy.
Yeah. I'm just like, look, I agree with your values basically, but you can't just. I mean, Philosophy Tube has been one of the worst consistently. I think, unfortunately, as much as I do like Abigail's videos, every time she mentions economics, I'm just like, oh god, here we go. Am I gonna have to make a response video to this? Because I don't want to.
Right.
But like that's the thing, right? So it's I do think that there's a lot of propaganda in economics. And another thing to say is I agree with you. I understand why the trade union would have that perception, because economists don't help themselves in the sense of, doctors are a profession, right? And lawyers are a profession. They're still hated, but they are a profession, and you get disbarred for certain conduct. Economists are a profession without a profession. And I think if they believe that they are being misrepresented as free market zealots, one of the things that they should do is maybe be clearer about, who actually represents them, and who can act as the talking head on the media and things like that. Because I think there are a lot of people who are from think tanks or whatever, and this is most people's first impression of economics as well, right? When you first hear economics, when you're like a teenager, you're first getting into politics or whatever, economics means right-wing economics. Why does Thomas Sowell call his book Basic Economics? It's not basic economics. It's not an economics textbook. It's way too one-sided and really poorly evidenced. It's not up to the standards of balance, rigor, empiricism, whatever, that you would have in an economics textbook. And that's not to defend your average economics textbook, which I also don't like, by the way. But it's a low bar, and Sowell doesn't manage to clear it. But he has the arrogance, I think, to call that basic economics. And that is what you see on the internet and in the media. Maybe it's changing a little bit recently. I think there has been a successful war against that kind of economics to an extent. But, that's what creates this perception. And I think it's a really negative thing for society that we have those people at the, elevated into positions of power or as voices in the media. It's also really negative for economists who, aren't really like that. And I mean, the boring truth is most economists are just careerist academics who are publishing on questions that most people wouldn't even be able to make sense of, let alone care about politically, right? Like, that's the boring truth, right? So that's not really what economists are like. But there's not a public duty from the discipline, I think, to dispel these kinds of myths, and to police a bit, I think, who is allowed to pass themselves off in this way, which is it's what creates that perception, basically.
Yeah, and I would say it's they're elevated not because they're making the best arguments and that they have this hegemonic position within economics as the authority. That's why they're why are these people the ones that are allowed to print the basic economics textbooks? And it's it's at least to me obvious that it's because it's super useful, right, for the capitalists to have this group of people creating this bulwarks, right? This academic bulwarks against any sort of criticism, right? Whether from inside economics itself proper or external from it. It's probably, I would say, one of the top kind of defenses that they have is that faction of folks within economics and how they interact with the media and academia and I mean, my God, my the 101 class I told you about, that's the extent of my formal education in economics, I did horribly in, and it's because I kept asking the wrong questions, and the professor was just sick of me, and it bit me a little bit at the end of the semester there, but but it was, I couldn't go any further. I mean, it worked, right? I was prevented from progressing any further than the intro class. Not that I wanted to do economics as a profession, but I'm very I'm keen to learn more about it. And there was like almost this antibody response, right? Like the immune system kicked me right out, and I can't help but feel that that's on purpose. So yeah, it's a really tricky kind of whole function in society that I think is going to have to be tackled head on to start to really make any change. As long as there's these talking heads on CNN here in the States or on BBC, news over there, who can whip out these great talking points, right? That are like so finely tuned, and it seems like everyone's reading off the same script. Until we have a good taxonomy of those things and good weapons, both from inside economics and outside, to combat them. Like I don't know if you've ever come across like the risk argument here in the States, but there's such in the American mentality of entrepreneurship and bootstrapping and everything, there's such a mentality of the justification of ownership being because they are the ones taking the risk to start the business, right? And so there's this whole ideological kind of argument wrapped up in this nice little phrase of like, well, they took the risk, and so that's why they get to do everything with the business, and they get all the profits and blah blah blah. And it's like it's intractable. And what you said about philosophy tube is part of the problem. Is like the left is not listening to you and your criticisms of the left, and it has to. Like this is not a one-way street where leftists get to be dissatisfied with the economy and how it's working and not do the hard work to learn about the field, to learn about the internal difficulties and struggles and factions and tensions, the values that underlie those, and how to actually craft better arguments that are going to be more effective. And and you've mentioned this a few times, but like the state of the left and this like inability to build bridges and tolerate differences, as much as there's tolerance in terms of identity and all sorts of other sorts of personal kind of society's segment. I always think of it as a fabric that's divided in two dimensions, vertical slices and horizontal. You have horizontal slices that separate people by their religion, race, beliefs, whatever, and then vertical slices based on class. And there's so much willingness in the left to cross all of those divisions. Maybe not so much vertically, although I think we need that too. But the second, from within the stratification of the left, you have a disagreement, right? Then it's like it's disaster, and we can't talk to each other. Like tankies, maybe they're a lost cause, but like they're part of the reason they're so radical is they've insulated themselves and driven away everyone else from. There's no charity, there's no camaraderie, right? It's all about creating your own little special bubble where you're right because you've read the most Trotsky, and everyone else just doesn't get that the only way forward is a vanguard party and a violent revolution. And I know that because I read all the right books, right? And you didn't read this one little passage, blah blah blah. It's psychotic. I mean, it's not a real political program, and it's a disaster. And so it saddens me to hear that, at least from what you said, that your criticisms of other YouTubers are not taken in good faith or well. I don't know how you delivered them. Maybe maybe there's work to do on your side as well. But,
well, of course. No,
yeah.
I mean, I don't know how they would take. I mean, my channel's grown quite a lot. The commenters, at least I can say, took them quite well. I remember. I mean, I don't want to make this about Abigail because I don't.
Oh no. Absolutely.
But
no.
she did at the time, kind of, because my video, it just got like, I had like 1,000 subscribers, and then I made a response video to a big YouTuber, and I had like 50,000 right overnight.
Right.
And obviously she do it. She was aware. Unlearning economics is an idiot. So she stupid debate with idiot unlearning economics. Just upload this to your channel.
Really inflammatory, right? Yeah.
stupid.
Gotta work the algorithm.
bold unlearning economics. But
Hmm.
what was I saying? Abigail, yeah. So she did kind of in her next video, she kind of gestured towards it in a way that I really didn't like, because she was like,
Mm.
"Oh, people make response videos to me, and
Mm.
blah blah blah," and then just and kind of dismissed it in a way that suggested she was aware of it but hadn't watched it. And I was like, well,
Yeah.
you don't have to watch it, but don't mention it if you haven't watched it or if you're not going to engage with it. But I think in general, I mean, so FD Signify is somebody who said to me,
Mm.
you've kind of changed my mind a bit about economics, and I think it's just taking economics seriously, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
not this is the thing. It's a subject we should take economics seriously. We should take history seriously and
Hmm.
anthropology seriously, right? Like, there's not a hierarchy for me, but unfortunately, a lot of leftists just don't, and they think they can just do sort of vibes based economics, which or
Hundred
just the most dogmatic form of Marxism, which is like
percent.
which is literally what you said. It's like, well, you know, if you haven't read the lost chapter 5 draft of Marxist Capital
Right.
that wasn't in the final version, then you're not, then
Yeah,
you
only
don't
there
count.
did he deal with the transformation
Yeah, yeah.
problem, and because you haven't, yeah, no, that's also, I mean, but even within that, there are also sort of this whole, I don't know, kind of sect of Marxists, and I would consider, myself definitely a Marxist, if not just
Mhm.
like massively influenced by his work, but not in an economic way. Like, I mean, he was trying to act. You may know more about this than I do, but my understanding, he was really trying to act as a neoclassical. He was responding to Ricardo and Smith and writing in their style and on their terms to try and make a point
Mm.
about, even within this system that you've built, look at how it actually, may
Mm.
not function
Mm.
well.
Mm.
I grant you, he grants market equilibrium and all these sorts of things, and then
Sure.
starts asking questions, within that framework. And that was the point. The point was not like what I think some leftists today try and do, which is latch onto that and like try to take it just as far as any other neoclassical or Keynesian or post-Keynesian model with all of the rigorous like research and everything. I just think it's like it's missing the point a little bit, which was Marx was really making, again, like I think a political argument at the end of the day, doing through the vehicle of an economic work, but trying to extend that now I don't know how much utility there is in that.
You subscribe
Um,
to what I would call the even if view of
mm,
Marxist Capital, right?
mm-hmm.
Even if we accept the classical or even neoclassical assumptions, even if we accept market equilibrium, perfect competition, capitalism will still tend towards crisis, right? Is that maybe a glib way
Maybe, but
summarizing it?
yeah, yeah, but like even like this like crystal ball, like falling rate of, like, I don't particularly care if the rate of profit falls or it doesn't.
No, me
It's
neither.
so, yeah, it's like, and people will make that a load bearing pillar in their argument and get into these uh, nitpicking minutia debates about like the statistics and everything around
Hmm.
it, and it just doesn't matter to me,
Guilty.
in the same way that yeah, that like, that like doing the same thing in a slave system would matter to me if the rate of
Hmm.
profit fell or not. Like, it doesn't matter. I I don't know if maybe it is a what if position about capital. I do think there's maybe, and actually maybe we could touch on the also, how are you doing on time? I'm doing great, but I
I'm
don't
okay.
want
I'm okay.
to.
Fine.
Okay, great. Yeah, I have whenever you get tired, just let me know. But I tend to kind of talk for as long as you want. Um, uh, Even within the, maybe we can touch on the labor theory of value, right?
Hmm.
It's like, even if there is not, and this might be a post Keynesian type approach, you'll have to educate me a bit here, but even if there's not a great solution to the transformation problem,
Right.
which I actually, someone made a response video to your video on value that I saw, and it was
Hmm.
incredibly toxic, but he made some good points, so maybe worth watching. But again, I would
You're
classify
not.
him
You're
as
not.
one of these
You're
people
not
who's,
selling it that well.
no, I mean, it really, like, it was so hostile. I was like, there's like, you're doing no one any
Yeah.
favors by
Yeah. Okay.
wording it this way. But he was citing, I think, whoever did the statistics in that you cited, that combined.
Cockshot.
Yeah, I think so. Combined. It somehow used output to scale
Yeah.
the value, and so he really gets into it and maybe makes some good points on those grounds, but it was really, really, like I said, an unproductive way, I think, to approach you. But if we put all that aside, like Marx's analysis of the workplace and how and value and how value is created, and this emphasis that there's something special about human labor itself, right? I think holds whether or not you're in a strictly economic kind of lens or not. From just a go to a workplace and watch what happens, sociological approach, I think it's obvious. His story is something along the lines of the capital brings the tractors, to the field, and the workers get on the tractors and plow the field and everything and create crops. And then the guy who brought the tractor and didn't do any of the work gets to say what happens with all the crops that they produced. And that's really his whole, it's not anything more complicated than that. And there's a, the point there being that the people doing the work don't have control over what happens with their work. Like the life, the literal life that they are spending, right? The energy that they're expending through their physical capabilities, their muscles, or their mental faculties, they don't have a say in what happens to that energy that they're expending, literally. And that's the real problem. And even if, yes, you can make all these arguments, so I guess it is a what if argument, right? Even if that dynamic does cause all of these crises in capitalism, even under the best modeling circumstances, or whatever, that's the problem. And that's the politics that informed Marx in taking that approach to begin with. So maybe my criticism of him, stands or is the same that I'd levy against other folks today who go too far on the left, who go too far into economics, and these sorts of arguments. But maybe, sorry, I'm going on a little long here, but maybe I'd love to hear, you said at the beginning, there are non-empirical arguments for the labor theory of value that you find compelling. Is that kind of one of them? Just
non-statistical, I should say, right?
Non-statistical,
so,
right.
What I meant was, there is a completely, I've had people say, you could even call it admit to me, that basically they just see the labor theory of value as a way of getting workers to realize that they're being ripped off one way or another, and agitprop basically. Right. I've seen more than one person say that, and that's fine. Like I said, we did. It was in the value video I used Jay from the In-Betweeners to illustrate the point, but there's a better there's a maybe better quote from Bill. Is it Haywood, the miner, where he was like, the mine owners, they didn't find the mines, they don't work in the mines, they didn't blah blah blah, and somehow all the gold belongs to them, right? It was really, I agree with that, right? It's like ownership versus actually doing work. I think my difference is just whether you can infer from that a whole bunch of dynamics about how capitalism works using the abstract concept of value, right? That's my problem. But one thing, and statistically, I just don't think it holds up. But I've read multiple articles, books or whatever, where they're like, okay, well, whether the labor theory of value is true in some scientific sense, why don't we just see what it can tell us about this particular period of crisis under capitalism, right? And that I often find pretty compelling, right? So that's kind of a historical type of analysis. Now, that doesn't mean that someone else couldn't come along and do an analysis that used the subjective theory of value, or maybe not even a theory of value at all, something else, and I could still be like, oh, that's quite compelling too, right? And then it becomes a bit of a judgment call. It's not really science in that sense, which one you want to favor, or if you want to say, both are valid in their own right. So that's just, it goes back to pluralism, right? That's this idea of, lenses. The Labour theory of value is a lens for me, and it's a lens which contains particular values about workers, which I think is why some people really like it. Values I tend to agree with, and it's also a lens through which we can make sense of particular historical episodes, including the emergence of capitalism, right? Being in fact, that was what Marx was seeking to explain. Whether you can predict the future with it, as you called it, is maybe another matter entirely. But that's a fine use of the theory to me.
Yeah, that prediction is I'm doing a lot of criticism of the left here, but I think it's far overdue, especially the online left, right? Which I purposely have never gotten on Twitter, but I understand that that's particularly like
I'm locked out of Twitter at the moment, actually, which may be a good thing. It doesn't. Well, the app doesn't work anymore because Elon Musk took it over. So now I just can't log in. So I'm like, I mean, it's kind of a good thing. So I'm not exposed to the online left or the online right, or even the online center. Just Twitter,
right? Really. Just Twitter, yeah. But they tend to try and extrapolate the future out of. They're stuck in like a 1920s kind of moment politically, and want to extrapolate that out into the future and have a plan. I think really what it is there's, like I said in the beginning, the left is kind of sailing in the dark without understanding the night sky and being to coordinate where we are and where we're even headed. And so there's a yearning, I think, for a concrete plan. Like if we just do these steps, A, B, C, D, we will arrive at our goal. And that's like not how history works, right? And I don't even think Marx would have claimed that. He made, I think, claims about tendencies, in history and forces and how history unfolds. But he was a Hegelian. I wasn't Hegel the one who said, the owl of Minerva or something departs at, I don't know. The point being, like, you can only understand history retrospectively. You can only contextualize what's happened after the fact, and trying to somehow do that in a forward-looking way gets you things like, gets you horrible experiments. And that is the lesson of the 20th century in socialism, is when you try to do stuff, you're going to make huge mistakes. And if you think you're infallible, it doesn't turn out well, right? The everything from the USSR through, I don't know if I studied East Asian history in college, and I think many people don't really understand actually how and why Korea started to adopt more radical left-wing policies, and how the North-South split really happened. And it really, it all came back to U.S. intervention very early on, and Korean government intervention very early on to crush the sort of communist tendencies there. And these things are not, like, everything about how people weaponize Marxist thought says that these things shouldn't have happened, right? The USSR should not have devolved into what it did. Revolutions should be inevitable and happen, organically and naturally in these grand ways. It's a fairy tale. I mean, it hasn't happened, and I wish the left would stop clinging to this and start realizing we're in our own moment, right? Like, you're not going to have a violent revolution in any country, but especially not the U.S. when you're going up against predator drones and and nuclear weapons and everything. We have to fight a different fight now. Like, this is not the same world as the 1920s. We've got like the internet, right? Even you and I can speak now like this, and it's just it's a totally different landscape materially. And if we don't catch up and start coming up with new plans in the moment, we're not gonna get anywhere.
Another Varoufakis plug as well, because in Another Now, I don't know if you've read that, but he talks about a sort of computing based revolution of
Yeah.
cutting off payments and subscriptions, I think, and
Yes.
sort of hacking computer systems and stuff, and basically blowing up the global financial system that way. Obviously, it's a work of fiction. Whether that's how you do it, I don't know, but it's thinking, right? It's thinking about modern revolution, modern change.
And that's not to say, when I'm making kind of this claim about using history to try and predict the future, it's not to say you can't draw lessons from history, right? It's just that I don't think there are concrete plans and blueprints for how to architect the future from the past. So that's a beautiful point. A good lesson from the Russian Revolution is knots of power, right? In society. Then it was telegraph stations and post offices and government buildings. Now it's stock exchanges and banks and financial institutions, and the underpinning of the international global financial system. And even platforms like Meta and X. I hate to call it that, but these things are. These are the knots of power.
I hate to call either of them that, actually.
Yeah.
Facebook and Twitter,
horrible.
damn it.
Facebook and Twitter, damn it. Yeah, exactly. But these are the things we need to be talking about, and it's like, and you can criticize me for bringing my professional experience as a software engineer into this, but for me in the field, it's obvious, right? This is where power rests now, is in these systems, and if we're not talking about them and still playing these playing out these fantasies of reenacting these old 20th century style revolutions, which all failed. Yes. To varying degrees, some less so than others, right? But none were successful in a fully international, revolution. Then we're just going to keep losing, and it sucks to lose. Like I think we're all sick of that, and are ready for something real. So. Yeah, that's all just to, I'm maybe unfairly straying a little far from economics here for you, but these are all, things I hope to speak about more in the future. But maybe just to bring this back a little bit to more of your realm. I'm curious, in your work online, and your channel's history and everything, Unlearning Economics to me is both it's a great name. I think there's a lot of depth to that, but it also, I think, is a bit of a mission statement in some sense, and an indication of your own political project, maybe. What have you run into outside of, I'm really curious about this, outside of your criticisms of the left not being taken as seriously as they probably should be. What other challenges, I think, like socially within the space, have you faced, and what do you think we could be doing better to overcome them?
Oh God, socially, I think that's a really good question. It's the type of question that I'm really bad at answering.
Yeah, no worries.
I might have to think about that one. I mean, in terms of what people listening to me, or like making friends within the content creator space. I mean, I haven't had trouble making friends within the content creator space. I really haven't.
Let me rephrase it, maybe.
Yeah. Okay.
You want. Don't let me put words in your mouth, but I think you want people to unlearn economics.
Sure.
In a specific sense, right?
Yeah.
What has prevented that? Maybe it's been totally successful, but where are you running into friction? Whether that be, and we don't have to talk about drama or anything sensitive if you don't want to, but I can't imagine it's been just like a smooth road. I think it's
I think it's interesting. I mean, one thing I do often find, and one of the broad visions, themes of my channel is kind of like, the YouTube channel Your Theory Sucks. Have you heard of that one?
I don't actually know.
It's actually about film theories, because there's so many weird film theories online that just don't make sense, right? And they just they just go through it and they just debunk it, right? And I feel like that's a general perspective that I have. I don't like mainstream neoclassical theory. I don't like a lot of Marxist economic theory, and I don't even MMT, which people always ask me about. Like, I'm not that keen on it, and I think that one issue that you have is people want to plug in to these frameworks, and they see that partly because it coheres with their values, partly because they think it makes sense in terms of the evidence, and partly, and it goes back to this kind of Twitter thing, right? There's a community there, right? And I think there might even be, it's sad to say, but a kind of bias towards, the first thing you're exposed to when you log on online, especially if you're young, especially younger people, teenagers, and there's a lot of my audience, I think, on average, is probably younger than me, and I think there are probably a lot of 16-year-olds who watch my content, right? And it's like being part of a group, and I do remember when I was about 18 and I first started going online and looking at things before I was like unlearning economics, and I was on the Something Awful forums, actually. So I used to post on there. I used to be mate, what were they called? The Something Awful guys. There was a name for them specifically.
Not intimately familiar.
Yeah,
but
it was. There's somebody on chat like chat will remember, but it was the chuds or whatever. It was something like that. But so I remember that the political subforum of Something Awful was very dogmatically Marxist. Goons. It was Goons, of course. Thank you, everyone. It was very dogmatically Marxist, and to be on the line between being tanky and not being tanky, right? Like, certainly hatred of capitalism. Some people would be more outright Maoists or whatever, and others might be a bit more pragmatic and not really like Mao. But I do remember being immediately socialized into that space, and it was very much a case of like, I said a few things that were maybe just centrist in the way that your average middle class British person is, right? I was like, oh well, maybe on the one hand, on the other hand, blah blah blah, and then was just like jumped on immediately by the Marxists who were like, no, capitalism is the worst system ever, and this thing you said is sexist and the other thing's racist, and I was like, whoa, Jesus Christ. Now, I probably, out of some form of social shaming. Also, though, because I think my values did cohere with theirs, I just had a lack of awareness. I didn't want to be sexist or racist. I'm not someone who was raised like... I was raised in a household with being completely against anything like homophobia or whatever. So it did cohere with my values. It just took me a while to accept that I might have those... biases, right? But the point was, it was very much join us or get out, right? In a sense, I joined them. I mean, not in a... I've never really been wholesale into any particular group, but I carried on posting there, and I got pushed quite drastically to the left, and I read a load of books and about US foreign policy and the Cold War and the Soviet Union, and like biographies or quasi-biographies of like Stalin and stuff, and I've still got some of them, and we're not talking Grover, is it Grover Fur? Grover, who's the fucking Stalin apologist? We're not talking that level anyway, but we are talking about just engaging quite a lot with that Marxist space. And so it was quite socially determined, I think, and I don't know that I ever would have really joined a libertarian, because there was actually even a stronger libertarian presence online. We're talking 2009. At that time,
it was huge.
There was a huge libertarian presence online, and I could never get in with that, no matter how much I was shamed or whatever, right? I was never going to, because they just struck me as a bunch of absolute lunatics. And also, libertarianism is really American. Like, American, I think they don't realize this. Like, they're really American. Like, the whole thing about the government, and nobody else cares about the government in that way. Even if you don't like government abuse, you're not like, get the government off my lawn, or whatever. It's like, it's a very American thing. So that philosophy, for various reasons, didn't cohere. But I think you do end up sorting into camps that are partly because of your values and evidence, but partly just because of the way online spaces and forums work. Now, all this is to say that these days, now that I've had a bit of time and education and space, I'm obviously not in that kind of Marxist tanky space anymore.
Yeah.
Nor am I. I'm still certainly not in the libertarian space. I'm a market socialist. But I don't, even though MMTers are like 99% agreement, or well, maybe 90% actually, right? It's like I'm not an MMTer either. So I'm not in any of those spaces. Now, what that leads to, right, is actually that I'm in quite a lonely space. Now, I stress that this is like not about my personal life. I'm completely happy. But I'm saying, like, I don't, because I will turn around and just have a go at Marxists for their crappy statistics. And then I'll have a go at MMTs because I don't think their policies follow from their framework. And I'll have a go at libertarians, and I'll have a go at mainstream economists as well, right? And so what that leads to is like, although I do, again, have friends in the content space in a social way, like intellectually, I am kind of alone-ish. Right. I mean, I've got, people maybe like you who I agree with a bit, Econo Boy who I agree with a bit, and Vorsh I kind of agree with on economic stuff quite a lot. There are people, but we're not really a community in that sense. So, the answer is when you make those communities angry, it is pretty taxing. You're like, Jesus Christ, like I'm just
Totally.
you know what I mean? I'm just like, I don't know what your problem is because actually I do know what your problem is. Sorry. Your problem is that you've intertwined your political beliefs with your personality, and you are interpreting my very arcane criticism of how you do statistics as an attack on you personally. And that's because of where you have partly chosen, partly been pushed towards, the community that you've partly chosen, partly been pushed towards, right? And so you get very dogmatic people. So like socially in terms of online, it can be quite alienating at times. Now that's, I still have, I don't know, 6 figures YouTube subscribers and stuff. Like people obviously like my videos, right? I have a lot of fans. I have Patreon fans and stuff, but not being unlearning economics. And this goes back to unlearning economics, right? And what it means. When I first started it, it literally just meant unlearning neoclassical economics, unlearning, in fact, free market economics, libertarian economics, the talking heads that we were chatting about earlier, right? That's what it meant. But now it kind of means unlearning any non-pluralist economics, right? As in any specific school of thought is potentially in the crosshairs, because I don't like it when people dogmatically adhere to one school of thought. There is no theory in economics which will grant you all of the answers in anything approaching a scientific sense. And part of the reason I attack these theories is because I believe that, which is in a very meta way, by the way, which nobody actually notices this, which in a very meta way, it's a way of saying, actually, we have to have conversations about values. We do, because your theory sucks. Your theory sucks, and I'm I don't buy it because it has all these flaws, and every single theory in economics, especially the most comprehensive, all-encompassing ones, has flaws, major flaws, and so I'm not going to use any of them as a basis for advocating socialism. I think you need to be much more pragmatic than that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think a couple things in that, like super important. One, we need a space. Right? Like we need a space for people like you, for people like Econoboy, for me, for Vosh. I'm sure there's many others that I'm unfamiliar with. I forgot who I was just reading. A book that Adolf Reed recently mentioned, something about organizing and the distinction between organization and mobilization. And one is, one is really like getting people who are just kind of not politically active engaged, but the other is connecting people who are politically active but disparate and not collaborating, right? And those are two separate and important things you have to do in parallel. I think I don't know what else the author has to say about it, but it's if we're only doing this sort of which I think a lot of especially American socialist organizations really focus on, is like newspaper selling, like tabling, those sorts of things, and trying to do the mobilization part. But the insides of those organizations are exactly as you described. They're incredibly dogmatic. There's no room for discussion. In fact, I joined one very briefly at the start of the pandemic because I felt so isolated, and I had to leave because I brought up BDS, boycott, divestments, and sanctions with Israel. And they were like, no, this is like revisionist liberal garbage. We don't care if it worked in South Africa. We think the only way for Palestinians to gain rights is through a general strike, and that's it. And I was like, this is just literally childish. Like this is not a serious. This cannot be a serious discussion that we're having.
Yeah.
That you didn't even know what BDS is, and B, you're saying without even knowing anything about it that it won't work, or it's it's nonsense or something like that. And so like there's not like we have to reject all of this, right? Like we need to build inclusive. I don't want to sound too flowery here, but I really mean it. Inclusive, kind, charitable spaces, and I even hate the word spaces, but communities of folks who are maybe have differences but agree on the right things. And actually the US right wing does this beautifully. Like they will accept everyone from like the grandpa sitting on the racist grandpa sitting on his front porch like watching the black kids, right?
Yeah.
To straight up Nazis. And like the diversity of thought within that range is gigantic. But they don't care, right? Like like they're all gonna show up to support Trump, or they're all going to advocate the same talking points on some level. They have a much higher level of cohesion and collaboration than the left does. Yeah, message discipline. Yeah, and it's not even structured, it's organic, and that is interesting maybe in itself to understand why that is.
Have you ever read Corey Robin on The Reactionary Mind?
No, I haven't.
Yeah. He basically thinks that conservatism is inherently counter-revolutionary, right? Which is kind of obvious to say, but it's the point is it's a movement, which is things have to change to stay the same, and that kind of the fear of change, rather than because I think a lot of people intuitively think of conservative as meaning stay the same, but it's not. If you look at like Thatcher and Trump as well, in two very different ways, they're not stay the same, right? They're like they're very much about change, but change in order to re-establish conservative values, change in order to stay the same. It's a really interesting book. It's funny what you were saying there about the BDS stuff. It reminded me of at first I thought you meant BDSM, and I was like, what the fuck? But yeah, no, it reminded me of the Socialist Workers' Party in the UK. Have you ever heard of them? Now,
my understanding of the left in the UK is like a huge number of fractured branching.
I mean,
so I'm sure it's
this is the
them,
thing, right? You've got socialist. You've got the Socialist Party, the Socialist Workers' Party, the Workers' Socialist Party. It's very much like the Monty Python sketch, unfortunately. But anyway, the SWP are notorious because they had basically credible allegations of SA and even R-word, right, going on inside their organization, and you weren't allowed to go to the police because the police are, of course, a bourgeois institution, right? So what you have is essentially a fucking abusive gang of men doing all sorts of horrible things, and you're not allowed to interact with anything that's deemed bourgeois at all. And, that's horrible for a start. Also, never going to achieve anything strategically, obviously, because you're pushing women out in a very obvious way. You're pushing anyone who disagrees with you about that out. And you're giving yourself a whole load of well-deserved bad press, right? And it's just like that. I think it's that kind of dogmatism, isn't it? It's like, oh God, that's where the right are right. That's what bothers me, because I don't like saying that. But when you hear all these complaints about wokeism or, whatever, and about 99% of it is just crap. But then, it doesn't help to have these spaces on the left where people are just behaving like a parody of the left that the right would imagine,
Right. Well, in the same way that the Southern slave owners levied for the wrong reasons, maybe the right critique against the North.
Yeah.
People aren't listening. There's a reason that the right reacts to the left in the ways that they do, and it's not because they're fantasizing some aberration, some ghost. It's they're reacting to real tendencies in the left, in the so-called left, I would say, right?
And the center as well, I think, as well. I mean, that's one thing
Yes.
about my channel is I think I can win over some center people, and maybe some right-wingers as well, but like those people do tend to prize economic statistics or whatever, which is part of the mission of my channel. But I think, yeah, some of the center, when they see everyone talking about like guillotines or whatever, and it's like, okay, so first you realize guillotines were very reactionary historically, right? Also, do you really want to chop people's heads off? Like, is that's your vision of socialism, is it? Right? Like, and I get that it's a bit of a joke sometimes. It just means, fuck the rich, right? And it's not the same as being anti-Semitic and sort of fucking hell. What's the term that we use in free speech discourse? Instigating violence against Jewish people or whatever.
Oh,
right?
sure.
It's not the same. There's a different relationship there. There's a different power relationship, but it does put people off a lot. And I think if that's all you're doing, you're fantasizing about, like, you've just got like Mao, a picture of Mao, and you're like, yeah, kill all the landlords. And it's like, I don't want to kill my landlord. He's quite nice. I don't like the landlord-tenant relationship. I would much rather have a better approach to housing, and I would rather not be privately renting in the first place. I do think that he takes too much of my income, but I think given, he's a nice person. He's really nice, actually. He's much nicer than I am. And like, I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, I want to behead him. It's just ridiculous.
Are you familiar at all with Michael Brooks?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So he had his wonderful saying about being kind to people and ruthless to systems.
Yes.
Right. And this is like a foreign concept to the groups that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Right. And the sloppy use of hyperbole in the guillotines example, right? Even if they, some people may actually think that, which is disturbing, but others, I think, it's maybe tactical hyperbole, right? They in some ways it prioritizes that kind of communication, prioritizes posturing within your own social spaces over, welcoming others into them and making it easy to join you in your thinking. And it's not just annoying that the left is woke, right? Because you get called, call out culture on Twitter or whatever. It's a tactical failure. Like this is maybe one of my most unpopular opinions, but I think actually during the Black Lives Matter protests, the beginnings of them, and sort of like the mid 2010s, you had the rise of this saying Black Lives Matter and the reaction to that of all lives matter, right? And that's even till today, that's seen as like all lives matter is seen as a dog whistle or a something to be kind of shamed and policed and criticized. And I always wonder what would have happened if instead of having that allergic reaction from the left to that term, people looked a little deeper at the folks that were saying that. Some of them, yes, are going to be out and out racist and sure, maybe beyond working with, fine. But I think there were probably a lot of people who were maybe misguided, maybe didn't understand the term, or maybe just wanted a more universal movement, because obviously in the US, police brutality disproportionately affects Black people, but it affects everyone, mainly poor people as an entire class, right? So I always wonder what would have happened in that moment if Black Lives Matter had co-opted All Lives Matter and included it in their repertoire of weapons. I don't know what there was to lose, right? People talk
it's
about
funny,
the message and everything. Yeah.
Who's really good at that? And that is a controversial opinion, by the way, so I'm waiting to see what people say. But I think tell you who's really, really good at that is the LGBTQ community. Like literally, they just take anything. You can't insult them. I mean, you can temporarily, but then they'll just use it to describe themselves, right? They'll take any
absolutely.
fucking slogan. They'll take any slogan you've got, right? And that it's theirs. It's gone. You know, you try and hurl it, you try and use it against them, it's theirs. And they they are a very effective force, I think. And, you know, obviously we know there's a horrible backlash to trans rights and everything right now. It's not like they are, you know, it's solved, right? But I think if you're looking at successful lefty political forces in the modern day, I would actually put the LGBTQ movement up at the top. I mean, the way that gay marriage was legalized, they pushed for gay marriage to be legalized in the USA, is something that I have studied, because I thought they did such a good job of talking to churches, corporations. You know, it's not these bourgeois institutions, we can't talk to them. No, everyone was persuaded, right? And again, I'm not glossing over the issues, and I know conservatives, current Republicans, want to reverse that, by the way. I know that's true. But they're really effective. And I think part of it is, imagine if you'd managed to co-opt that slogan so that it was one that belonged to Black Lives Matter. I mean, it's an interesting thought, definitely, I think. Absolutely.
And it's not to downplay the there are I want to qualify that with, I think there's very credible concerns with that, right? And that's maybe a larger discussion. But it's just an example, right? It's an example of are there moments where we can be a little bit more like in a jujitsu type mode, or a water, acting more like water, where we can take weapons away from people wielding them against us and make them our own, instead of just trying to, every single thing has to be explicitly kind of every battle has to be fought. Like, can we pick battles more tactically and maybe even gain strength in doing that, right? Yeah.
I mean, someone in chat said the right are really good at doing this as well, by the way. Like, that's
they're
part
great
of
from it.
They're literally just like, and they can turn things into a joke as well, which is not always the best thing to do. And obviously the right have the benefit that they just, like the Joker, just want to see the world burn or whatever, right? Especially the alt-right. But at the same time, you that ability to turn things around and make things a little bit more light, maybe, and just sort of make a joke out of something, co-opt something so that it loses its sting. I think that is really, really effective.
Yeah, and underutilized. And I would even say, because I sensed, I don't know if you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I sensed in how you spoke a little bit about kind of what maybe you'd call wokeism right before, or I would call it that as well, some real negativity. And that is I think people perceive that as such a fine line to walk between being progressive, being on the left, being a socialist, being an ally, being an advocate for, other people who you may not share the exact same, identity with, doing that and criticizing some of these other things. I think there's like this conflation, and I don't really believe it exists. And until we separate those things, and really start to focus on solidarity, and camaraderie across these lines, and maybe even differences in thought, it's going to continue to have this like super toxic kind of effect. And where it's actually coming from on the left, I would not even point inside. Now the leftists are really going to get like pissed off at me. I wouldn't even identify as the source of this type of thinking as from within the left itself. I would point to the financial capitalists, right? Like, people, I think, need to understand, we need to develop all sorts of new ways of thinking about things. But like Yannis's identification of cloud capitalists as a new kind of capitalist, right, is really important. But even the capitalist class is not uniform. It's not a monolith. There's internal, conflicts and struggles. And if I don't know anyone who's written on this yet. I'm sure someone has, but I'm sure there's writing out there about analysis of depending on the type of industry that a capitalist is involved in, or just a petit bourgeois, it doesn't matter. People, the industries, the material conditions of those industries are going to drive in some way people's values. So, like concretely, in agriculture or in manufacturing, in manual labor type jobs, there is a great amount of utility in pitting different classes, different identity groups against each other: white workers versus black workers, citizens versus immigrants, because it allows the exploitation of the slightly more dominant group to be carried out and kind of to sedate them in some sense, because they can always go into work and think, well, at least I'm not like treated like shit like the black worker down the line from me who is worse off in all of these ways, and that quickly can transform into, well, they really deserve it, right, because they're black and I'm white, and so I'm better. Like racism has a utility in these spaces. In a bank, like if you got money, you got money, all right? Like if you work on Wall Street, and you can create high returns for your hedge fund or something, no one there's so much less impetus in creating these sorts of distinctions, and so I would claim that this is where the wokeness comes from. Actually, is from this kind of section of the elite liberals who are overwhelmingly in academia, law, finance, healthcare, all of these spaces that don't, these other isms don't actually lend much utility in. That's where suddenly diversity of identity and opinion is more permissible. But the problem with that is now within those spaces, you open the door for new types of social hierarchies, right? Hierarchies based on how you speak about things, based on the information you have access to. Your, did you say Native American or American Indian or Indian or whatever? Like, I'm going to police you on your speech and enforce. There's a new structuring, like the what I'm trying to get at is like the separation, the black and white worker separation that you might have, or the immigrant citizen separation that you have in the fields is replaced. Like it's not just gotten rid of, it's replaced with something else that's also regressive and reactionary and awful. And that is, to me, like the incubator for the type of identity politics, call out culture type stuff that the right reacts to, and that elite leftists bring down into more actually progressive on the ground types of organizations, and it's just not like, I don't see any utility in it, right? Like there's no reason that we should be treating each other like this, and not trying to build more broad coalitions and kindly educate each other. So in this way, like Michael Brooks said, he's more anti-racist than woke, right? And
Right.
I think there was like a very important distinction there that is being missed. And so it saddens me, right, that I think both of us have. I would also kind of mirror your sentiment, the underlying sentiment you had when you kind of mentioned this. I think it's a huge issue. So that's all to say. If anyone in your audience also experiences this, I think it's just, we have to be really careful to understand where identity politics comes from and separate the wokeism from, like, just because you're it's not to say that speech doesn't matter, right? It doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't listen to how people want to be treated. It's just about maybe cultivating a more open environment for discussion, in some ways maybe a real safe space, right? And not
Right.
and not like this other type of safe space that's really just a reorientation of the social hierarchy in the absence of isms. So anyway, long kind of rant there, but I don't know. This is something I've been sort of considering. Does that resonate with you, or what criticisms of that might you
Is it
have?
something that you've researched then in an academic sense? Because it sounded quite
I've been
like
trying to.
right.
Zizek speaks about this
I
in.
was thinking of Zizek when you were talking.
Yeah,
I'm never
he
sure if
speaks about this
Zizek's
in.
like a complete genius or talking absolute nonsense. If I'm honest with you, that's sort of where I think that's
Yeah,
just the Zizek experience, isn't it? Maybe he's not sure.
he, he's I think he's just operating at a very specific frequency.
Yeah.
And you have to kind of tune yourself to it a little bit. I think there's a huge amount of really valuable stuff that he says and writes, but there's also I mean, even with him and Chomsky, right, they don't get along because they're speaking practically different languages. Chomsky's response is like, this is literally incoherent and I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You continental philosopher. Like I'm going to be over here in my analytical philosophy and much happier and much more clear and direct about what I'm saying. And I think there's maybe there's merit in that, but again, if they were to join forces, that would be crazy. I mean, that would be like when you start intermingling, going all the way back to pluralism, different schools of thought and start trying to make them work together, right? Supercharge both of them.
Yeah.
I just think there's a huge amount of pragmatic benefit in doing that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I agree. I think that obviously, they can learn from each other. I do really like Chomsky. I mean, maybe not recently, but I do like Chomsky's,
Yeah.
way of just using. If he talks about the police, for instance, he'll just use the description from like the police website to be like, this is what the police do, and I really appreciate that straightforwardness. But then I probably won't think about that for that long. I'll just be like, yes, that's right, Chomsky, that's right, Noam. And then, but with Slavoj Žižek, I'll listen to it and I'll be like, what the fuck's this idiot talking about? And then like 3 weeks later, I'll be like, wait a minute, now I know why he was talking about dildos, or whatever,
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, so what you're saying is, did you listen to Zizek's conversation with Alex Connor, Cosmic Skeptic?
Yeah. So I did. I have to out myself here. Speaking of good, movements that I think the left can learn a lot from. The vegan movement, I think, has some incredible lessons to be learned in terms of.
Was in that movement. I'm no longer a vegan, but I consider myself. I wonder if I'll still be included in it. But I'm a vegetarian now. But I was a vegan for 7 years, but I gave up on it for like just reasons of, you could call it selfishness, but it was just very stressful to be a vegan. Anyway, now I'm a veggie, but I still basically agree with veganism on a moral level. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it has made big inroads, right?
Huge inroads and extremely well sort of decentrally organized, really good, again, like really good taxonomy of all of the talking points, right, that they have to go up against. I think I'm forgetting his name. This is embarrassing. Oh, Earthling Ed wrote a book called like This is Vegan Propaganda. It's fantastic. I mean, it's brilliant. It's a systematic refutation of the entire mindset, right, that vegans are going up against, and it's beautifully done. I think we need those sorts of materials on our side as well. But anyway, the reason I brought that up is because yes, I did see that. I have the beard. You have slightly different facial hair. I was vegetarian for 7 years and then turned vegan, and it sounds like you went the other direction. But regardless, I did see his conversation with Alex, who I will try and sustain any or refrain from any sort of harsher critiques. I don't really know what happened to him because he flip-flopped, right? I think very recently.
Right. And became a meat eater.
Yeah, I mean, I hope I'm not disparaging him
I feel like he's been vague about this,
unnecessarily.
though. I mean, I really like Alex's,
Yeah,
takes,
yeah,
his interviewing skills, his videos and everything. I think he's pretty sharp, but
he is, and
yeah, if he's a meat eater, obviously, then he must be excommunicated and never spoken to again, contradicting everything
I
we've
think so
said.
too. Yeah, yeah, which is I levy the same criticism against other vegans. Like, look, if someone moves out of the movement, uh, that's not the student's fault, right? That's the teacher. Like,
Yeah.
something's gone awry
Mm,
systemically. Like,
mm,
don't go beat them over the head. Maybe try and do some self reflection first and find a way to bring them back or just improve.
mm.
But I'm sorry, you brought up his talk with Zizek.
Yeah, no, it's just what you were saying was it reminded me of, it was another thing that Zizek said where I was like, oh, this is stupid, but then I thought about it a bit and I thought it wasn't so stupid. But he said it's the sort of fable of the arriving at the tribe of cannibals, and you say, are there any cannibals left? And they say, no, we've eaten the last one. Which but that
Yeah.
kind of resonates with what you were saying, right, about the wokeness in the financial space,
Oh
in the
yeah.
elite liberal space, right?
It's totally cannibalistic. I remember that quote now that you said that. Yeah, it's that's exactly so. Unfortunately, I think Zizek has probably said the most about this, but in such incomprehensible terms that I don't know how much use it's been to a broader audience. And my concern with that is this is such a uh, bifurcating sort of cultural mechanism. You come into contact with this in high school or college or at your first job or whatever, and you either kind of buy into it, or I think you're pushed out of that kind of way of thinking and become more reactionary and move to the right. And neither of those options are good. I mean, it's really really
Mm,
destructive to any sort of serious leftist political project. So that has to be addressed as well. I mean, there's so many problems, and this just goes back to what I was saying that like um, we gotta start getting a lay of the land. We have to start understanding what needs to be done. Stop looking backwards so much. Start engaging with the electoral system more seriously. Start engaging with economists on
mm.
YouTube, off of YouTube, all of these things. So that's a little bit of maybe a plug for me
Yeah,
for
yeah.
your audience. If you're interested in what I'm saying, please give my channel a look. But ultimately that's what it's about. It's about actually getting stuff done, right? And it's not any one person's not going to be able to do the whole thing. It has to
Mm,
be a broader movement, and unlearning economics certainly has to be a core piece of that economics
sure.
portion, which is why I reached out in the first place.
Yeah, yeah, I'm glad you did. Your channel's been Nightbot has been trying to post your channel, although Nightbot it wasn't. Then somebody posted the link to your channel, and Nightbot banned them or timed them
Oh
out,
yeah,
which wasn't intentional. But yeah, I mean, I think
no,
I linked to
it's
it
got to
in the
be
description and shit. I hope you get a few
this is
subscribers.
Google big cloud capitalist censorship at
Yeah,
its
yeah,
finest. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
yeah, they're
I control
already
the
the
cloud.
yeah, yeah, the immune system's already ramping up here. So, but no, but I'm happy to talk about anything else that is on your mind as well. I know I sort of pitched this as pluralism, and we maybe went a little bit further
Yeah, we
down
went we
my
went we went
interests.
into politics. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess one thing that I don't know if we necessarily answered this, but you when you were speaking to Econoboy,
Mm,
you like you said he was very interested to know like what kind of system
mm,
you you see socialism as you'd like to see, right? And
yeah.
I guess if you could just give me again, not uh, exact plans with times and
Yeah.
dates and amounts of timber and stuff on them, but just like a few principles that you'd like to see with your vision of socialism. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. So, and I'll try to make it as concise as possible because it's really simple. Fundamentally, right, one of the goal here is to expand democracy, to create the conditions for more liberty, equality, and brotherhood or camaraderie, right, in society, and have the same sort of fundamental transition out of the current economic system into a new one, but to break with what Marx would identify as, this kind of underlying class distinction ever since agrarian societies started and we started to have surpluses and started having to figure out what to do with the surpluses and who controls surpluses, to get rid of this distinction between workers and owners. The same thing as with, lords and serfs and masters and slaves. How we actually go about doing that, right, is I think the crux of what you're asking, but that's just in terms of where my values are coming from, right? That's what they are. Again, let me rip right off of Giannis. Let's just ban the trading of stocks. Let's ban the ability to own stocks privately. The only people who own a organization are the people that work there, and they each own an equal piece and have an equal vote on everything. And that's it. I mean, get rid of the stock market, get rid of private trading of shares, and democratize the workplace. In the words of Richard Wolff, that's it. It's super, like, how we go about doing that. All of the other problems that are going to arise from doing that and how we deal with them, I have thoughts on, but maybe not, right? Like the lumber, this much lumber, that much chairs type equations. But I think they're all tractable problems. I don't see anything inherently in I mean, it would mean, right, the flip side of this is, like I mentioned earlier, the knots of power in our society are kind of are mainly held in the global financial system. And when you get rid of stock exchanges, the entire, like, fictitious circuits of capital that really kind of are the mesh of the global economy at some level. And what Giannis talks about, like this recycling system, right, where the US dollar's hegemony kind of sends profit and cash out into the world and abroad, and then recycles it back through the New York Stock Exchange. That's going to, that shuts down. And that's a huge problem because that makes a lot of things kind of tick in our economy. I'm forgetting his name. I always forget his name. It's so embarrassing. There's a great lecture on, I think he puts them all on YouTube, David Harvey. David Harvey talks about, like, look, any transformation of the economy, the global economy is so advanced and so interconnected at this point, we can't break supply chains. We can't disrupt international trading and logistics really at all, right? Because, like, remember that canal, oh my God, I'm forgetting the name of the canal that shut down for, like,
Suez.
Yeah, the Suez Canal, right? Like
whenever it was the Ever Given, the cargo ship was stuck in it for 6 days.
One boat, 6 days, one block canal, right? I mean, disaster. Like, it was like everything was like it crippled a whole section of the international trading system. And if we do that, it will, bring untold misery upon all of the most vulnerable people, because the market is going to distribute.
It's interesting. It affected Sao Paulo. Even though the Ever Given, I've looked into this quite a lot, so I should be able to remember. It was going from Taiwan to the Netherlands, I think, but it disrupted the most trade in Sao Paulo in Brazil. Which is exactly what you're saying, right? It's the butterfly effect. It's so complicated, and they're poorer than either Taiwan or the Netherlands, right?
Right. And so the people with the least buying power will suffer the most when the market is disrupted in that way. So the any way we do this change, there will be consequences, and it's going to be really, a really messy kind of, in its own way, bloody, hopefully not like literally, right? But there will be problems, really big ones that have to be overcome. And if we're not thinking about those, it may be worse than it needs to be, which is where economists can come in and help. So, but in terms of what I laid out, in terms of banning the trading of private shares, what that's as concrete as I can get. It maybe is not where you were expecting, but what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty big change. I mean, when you say banning shares,
Yeah,
you mean the type of shares that we trade in the stock market, right? I guess you don't
yeah.
mean the idea of having a stake in a company, which would be still available to workers, just not
It
tradable.
scopes it, right? It scopes ownership down to the organization level, right? You gain ownership not through a actual certificate, right, that is backed by the state and that you can trade on the market.
Hmm.
You gain ownership through employment. I mean, employment would sort of cease to exist in the way we think about it, but you gain ownership through work.
Mm.
And people get so obsessed about like worker co-ops, like almost like in putting the cart before the horse type of sense, where they see it as like, oh, we need to do this because I don't know, it's like a worker co-op economy is like just as efficient as other firms, and like here's all these studies I have on like
Hmm.
worker co-ops and Mondragon and blah blah blah. But I'm starting from those values I proposed, and so that's why I would want to do that. But it's not complicated, and there's it's that leaves open all sorts of conversations about, well, do we have markets? What are the markets for? What is publicly what does a publicly owned company look like, where you have something like a hospital? It obviously serves the public interest, but also, do the doctors that work there also control it? Like, there's tons of interesting conversations to be had within this system, but the fundamentals of it are I think pretty cut and dry. And I don't know if they're hugely controversial either, but maybe I'm wrong. I mean, for some people, obviously they are, but within the left, I don't know. It seems like a very direct target to aim at, actionable, achievable through both through a diversity of tactics. Let's put it that way. If you want to get into Giannis's like financial engineering, another world type scenario, or just straight up through building real political power, there's many roads that you can take to get there, and I think it's worth exploring all of them.
I suppose the main question that you're going to get is like, how are funds allocated? How does investment happen? How is credit
Yes,
allocated if you ban the
right.
stock market? Obviously, stocks aren't the only way of funding, right? So, I mean, would
Yes.
you have bonds? Would you have would you still have banks? I mean, presumably they'd be worker owned or consumer owned or something, right? But you'd still have banks and ways of allocating funds, just not specifically stocks that can be traded.
Yeah. So the other piece of this, and the banking sectors, like the other critical kind of transformation that has to happen is just give everyone a bank account. State run bank account. Get rid of like all these middlemen. We don't need them. They're all just pass throughs for, at the end of the day, at least here in the U.S., the Federal Reserve and the various like kind of vague like distinction between the two. I think was revealed to be less far apart than everyone thought during the 2008 financial crisis, right? Where basically, the U.S. just gave them all money, like just flooded every, it was, they just turned on the spigot. There's no utility in my mind of retaining that distinction if it's not really real. So yeah, give everyone a bank account at birth. It can be digital. We have the technology. We can do it. And at that point, you've completely killed. Again, this is just ripping off Giannis. You completely killed investment banking. So all of these like worries we have about like financial bubbles bursting and the business cycle, right, as it's called, being influenced or being driven by this type of risky trading kind of goes out the door as well, which is a nice side effect. But you still need ways of starting new enterprises, right? And maybe this is naive of me, and this is, I'd love to be educated on this, but this is the point where Econoboy and I got stuck, because I said, like, look, I don't know if there's anything super magical or essential about private investment in the way that it happens now, that is going to be more effective in terms of like picking the right firms to start, or creative destruction and all of that. I don't know what would be in that is essential in private forms of investment that you could not get through sovereign wealth funds or debt financing, or even you could still have, there's nothing stopping you necessarily from having private investment still, as long as it does not confer ownership, right? Like you could loan a company and here's $1,000. Me and all my friends are going in to support our college friend or whatever who wants to start a business. We're all going to give him $1,000, and we're all going to hope for 2,000 in return at some point down the line. We get, it's a low interest loan. We're taking a risk. He's taking a risk. Talking about risk, but the only distinction is that, right, we make an agreement up front. Hey, like, I'm going to get, like, this is the return I expect. Maybe there's a time frame or whatever, but nowhere in there does it say, I get to control your work. I get to tell you what to do, right? It only says that maybe I see some benefit down the road in some sort of financial return. But there's no ownership or control. So
I'm in favor of separating ownership and control, right? I mean, I think that's the thing, right? So there's they're sometimes called Class B shares, which would give you a return, but they wouldn't give you any type of voting rights. That remains in the hands of the workers or whoever is running the company, maybe the community as well, or the consumers, whatever type of co-op we want, or the government or the state. So yeah, I mean, I'd be in favor of that. I guess the sticking issue is really whether the stock market can be entirely banned without massively affecting the amount of money that's allocated. And I kind of go. I go back and forth on this because I don't think that financialization has been a good thing. I don't think it has. I think that if you look at like growth rates and things like growth rates, things like inequality, things like crisis, right? Not just growth rates overall, but the sudden plunge. They've definitely got worse with financialization wherever they've been tried. And that's, I mean, the best example, right? East Asia, which you said you'd studied, right? As soon as they deregulated finance in the 90s, they were doing pretty well before then. And then some financial crisis, shock, right? Then we did it, financial crisis, right? You know what I mean? It's not, in fact, Thatcher like deregulated lending. Sorry, not even Thatcher. Before Thatcher, we deregulated lending in the UK in 1970. 3 years later, crisis, right? It just is so reliable, right? Like so yeah, like I'm not in favor of it is like clockwork, and it's quite remarkable. And I think one of the problems these finance guys have is that I know people in finance, and they really think they make the world go round. Because they're in like meetings and they work long hours, and have you ever seen Industry? There's a British show about, and it's like it's all so fast paced, and it's like, but that doesn't mean you're actually making anything happen, let alone anything good, right? Right. So, however, having said that, one problem that a lot of us have as leftists and anyone outside finance really is that we don't really know it. And one guy I'd shout out here, other than Varoufakis, is actually Adam Tooze. I don't know if you follow him. He's great.
No, I will.
He's an economic historian. His Substack's like so detailed. It's a bit rough and ready. Like he just clearly like does one draft, but he knows all of the things about everything, apparently, seemingly. He also wrote Crashed, the definitive guide to the financial crisis of 2008 and the following 10 years, as well as Shutdown, which is a very good guide to the coronavirus crash. So, he's really good, and he knows all this stuff about finance, but he retains this skepticism, like this kind of underlying feeling of, I've got to learn all of this. I've got to know what the difference between a stock and a bond is. I need to know what bank capital is, what equity is, but I am retaining this underlying suspicion that it's all kind of bullshit and a way for you all to make loads of money off us. And I think that's a good approach. I don't know about banning stocks outright. It depends. You didn't say how you'd implement it, right? I think maybe it's to take it as a goal might be more adequate to take it as a kind of eventual goal. And I think you'd have to experiment with. I'm a big fan of credit co-ops. I'm a big fan of building societies. I am a fan of Yanis Varoufakis, another now kind of bank account with the central bank type thing, so people could maybe finance their own expansions and Class B shares, right? But, do you have a stock market that is, it is wholly supported by the Federal Reserve, like you said? And Adam Tooze actually recently posted a really interesting, if dense 100-page history by other people of the Federal Reserve, and how it was very much a deliberate political creation, and how intertwined it is with the US financial system, the global financial system. It's far from a neutral actor, and so all of that. My suspicion of it is that it's at the very least hugely outsized and not really delivering the kind of things we want to, which isn't the same as saying anything that is called finance is unnecessary and bad. But that is, right now it's the digital economy, right? But I think the financialization and the digital economy are the two big developments that have happened, in the latter half of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st, right? And those are the things we need to wrestle with. We need to understand them really well and think about how we're going to shift them to serve the interests of the people, which is, it's like anyone who has a really good understanding of like computers, of the patent system, the copyright system, they're going to deliver a much better critique of the tech sector than somebody who doesn't, right? And that's the space we need to be in.
Absolutely, yeah. That's why we got to go find those. Even Econoboy was like, he was running circles around me in terms of I was like, I don't even know, stock, bond. Like I'm gonna potentially mix those up. You're gonna have to correct me.
Try Central Banking 101. It's a 200-page book by Joseph Wang. I can't remember. Anyway,
suspicious of anything with 101 in it.
Honestly, he's a central banker, and it's like a pretty hands-off, and he's clearly a mainstream economist. It's fine, but he does just accurately describe all of that stuff, all the basic definitions you need to know, how central banks work and stuff. There's also a Jacobin article called A Socialist Primer on Monetary Policy, which is quite a good one, which is a bit more basic, but I don't know, just that it's a good place to start. But like a finance guy like Econoboy, he knows more than, I'm a trained economist, he knows more than me. Most economists don't know that much about finance, by the way. They actually don't. They're two different disciplines. Like, we don't do that. We do other things, right? So it's like, it's a big task to understand the system that we're critiquing, right?
Yeah, and that was that was a surprise to me, actually, because I wasn't even clear of that distinction until maybe
between what? Sorry, between
the different kind of flavors of economists, right? Like finance
right.
is like very kind of its own specific thing. And in some ways kind of the same thing, like in schools, you have your economy classes and business courses. And like the fact that those two things are separate is interesting, but not intuitive for like the uninitiated, right?
Of course.
So that's something I'm still learning. Yeah. But what I was going to say with the finance is maybe just to like put my finger on it. I don't, even with my less than stellar understanding of the intricacies of finance, I still am pretty sure, I'm pretty confident in this, that the stock market like is not in and of itself like helping to invest in companies, right? This is a marketplace for trading shares. The companies don't see necessarily. I understand there's there's some mechanisms potentially for companies to benefit from the stock market, like you can use stock buybacks to make it look like you're doing better than you are or whatever, if you're using your share price as a barometer of your performance, which I think is also probably pretty. I think everyone is coming around to the idea that that company performance and their stock price are divergent at this point, and then not necessarily tightly coupled, especially with like you have tech companies running huge losses every quarter, and yet they're still like fetching insane valuations, or insane stock prices. So what I'm really getting at is like, I don't know what function the stock market plays in efficiently, it's a bit of a loaded term, but efficiently allocating investment. To me, what it appears to do is mainly serve as a way for very wealthy people to multiply in a kind of a fictitious way their wealth, right? Like if I am extremely rich, and buy a bunch of stocks, I can then go to a bank and say, look, I would really like a low interest loan, because I have all my cash tied up in these assets on the market, and it's valued at this much. So give me a loan of $10 million, and I'll put my $10 million of stocks as collateral. And then they take that cash, the hard cash, out, and they might go invest in other things, or buy a yacht, or find other ways to turn that money into more money again, right? Maybe start another company with it. Like the function of the stock market, I don't think is integral to making sure that we are creating businesses in the market with the correct and appropriate like amount of investment in the right industries, in the right formats, all of that sort of stuff. And that's why I'm maybe more bullish on just getting rid of it, because I don't see, outside of serving the wealthy, I don't see a lot of utility in it, right? Like
the idea is that it's supposed to tell you whether a company is overvalued or undervalued, right, in real time. Right. That's the idea of it, right? So it's like if you take Deliveroo, I remember my friend my friend who works in IPOs, he initial public offerings, that is, for anyone that doesn't know, when Deliveroo first floated on the stock market, he was like, buy Deliveroo, and we all laugh at him because obviously he's an IPO expert, but he just tanked, the stock immediately tanked. But the idea is, right, that's the market saying, look, you guys have said your business is worth £1 billion, but we think it's actually worth 700 million, and that's the knowledge that we have based on a diverse variety of experiences in traders. I mean, that's the justification for the stock market, right? That the business is valued accurately. I wouldn't doubt there's a lot of noise in that. I don't think. I mean, I have, again, different finance friend. I have too many finance friends, I think. But he was like telling me about how, there's the Elon Musk factor, right? Tesla's value way outstrips any type of like physical valuation you could give. Whatever it's doing, it's not doing enough to justify its value, right? And that's how Elon Musk is the world's richest man, partly. And it's like, my friend was telling me about, there's this like steel mill in in the Midwest of US or whatever, and it's just like, it just produces steel, and they just produce loads and loads of steel, and they've had like 40% returns for like decades, and nobody invests in that because it's just boring steel, and everyone invests in Tesla because it's Elon Musk and he's from the future or whatever, right? So I think there's a lot of noise, and there's an issue with narratives. I mean, there's the Folding Ideas YouTube video was recently about this. Those guys who, he was talking about GameStop, right? You remember with GameStop,
yeah.
and how, but they're still there, those Redditors, and they're still clinging to the idea that GameStop will eventually go up into, like, it's really funny.
Into
They think it's
the stratosphere.
Literally, they talk about, what do they talk about? Gorillions or something? Oh, because they're gorillas, they're apes. They're apes because of NFTs, so they're gorillions. They actually think an individual stock, bear in mind trading at below $20 a stock now, they actually think it's going to be like $1 billion per one stock or something. But anyway, the point I was trying to make is there are all these narratives, right, surrounding different stocks, and you get overreactions and underreactions and arbitrary stuff. But I think the best defense you could make of the stock market is that, despite these, the sort of long run tendency is to something that, somehow represents a company's fundamentals. And that's a really useful device to have for, it's the same defense you'd make of markets in general, right? It gives you information, which companies are the most valuable, and it allocates funds to the companies that are the most valuable, right? So it's like, if you're doing a really good job, then here's some money because you're receiving more funding, right?
And that's the second part, is that I'm not actually sure. So as far as I know, right, a publicly traded company sees no cash from the trading of their stocks or the their fluctuations.
Well, they do if they issue new stock, right?
Yes, yeah.
So that's how. Yeah, not on a continual basis, right? It's the stock market in the short term, you could say, is like a zero sum game, right? It's like some win and others lose.
Right.
So I don't know if it's an area where I'm not an expert really, and I'm not completely decided, right?
I'm not either, but what I would say is that what I even if I'm pretty sure they don't like directly see. It's not like a primary form of investment in any means for them if they see any cash at all from the But what they do gain is a mechanism to discipline their executives, right, or the folks in the company who have options and whose compensation may be tied to the market performance, right? So like CEOs can be disciplined to drive the price up to make the shareholders wealthy, which okay, that maybe that's a beneficial kind of disciplinary mechanism to have in a traditionally run hierarchical firm. But I guess the point I'm getting at is we started down this path because of the concerns of basically like how do we start the right businesses? How do we give the right businesses the right amount of money? How do we make sure we're not distributing investment in a inefficient, whatever that means, way. And I think my basic kind of contestment is if we flip this around and like go actually out and look, where does real investment come from? It's through venture capitalists. It's through at the high levels, it's through venture capitalists and mainly existing wealthy people. Like it's through capitalists, right? They're the ones sitting with all the money, and they decide, hey, I'm gonna pool together my 10 billion gorillions or whatever with all these other wealthy folks, and we're gonna trust these people at this firm to manage the fund and eventually give me more money back than I put in. So that has nothing to do with the stock market per se. There is maybe the expectation that the companies that are invested in will eventually go public, right? And that could be a mechanism to again increase their wealth. But what I'm getting at is like this whole circuit funds is kind of oriented not even at efficiently allocating capital now. It's aimed at creating businesses that will make the wealthy wealthier, right? Like capitalists, even bigger capitalists. So like this is kind of where I think where Econoboy and I, like I said, had a kind of talk past each other a bit, because when we're talking about efficiency in terms of investment, what even is an efficient investment? Is it efficient to create another I don't know if can I swear on your stream? Another bullshit, dating app or something like tech app, or the 10th kind of like NFT failure or crypto based like tech startup. Is that efficient? Like, I don't think that's efficient. I think efficiency would look like building, at least here in the US, like more high speed rail, more hospitals, green power, repairing our infrastructure, and maybe also investing in things like lower cost drug manufacturing, or all sorts of things, right? Like that, to me, that's efficiency. So this again is like when maybe you can help me through this. Like when there are concerns from folks like yourself, like what happens when we get rid of private investment in this form, or private control rather? I struggle to give you like I think a answer you would find compelling, because I don't have empirics to back this up, and my goals are in some sense to change what we even mean by efficient allocation. Like I want to get rid of our current form of efficiency, which is just piling on money to the people that already have money, and I want different outcomes. So I don't know, how would you sell that to yourself, or sell that to economists, if you could steelman that position for me? Like how can I improve in that pitch? Because you're the second person to ask me here on YouTube, and both times I don't think I'm giving you an argument that resonates like deep enough with you to really like drive it home.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I think that the first thing I would really concentrate on is that I just don't think that investing in something should necessarily give you control over its decisions. I think that you are entitled to risk permitting some kind of return, and maybe with interest or whatever, and that can vary based on whether it's a bond or equity or stock or whatever. But I don't necessarily think that there is a God-given reason that entitles you, that makes you the best person to make decisions for that company. In fact, the workers are usually the best people to make decisions for that company. The local community, the consumers, the people who are intimately familiar with the workings of the company, you are not necessarily. And I think another issue with stock ownership, or stock control, sorry, is that when you have so many shareholders, I mean, you've seen shareholder meetings, right? They're not a bunch of people around a board. They're like conferences, right? Yeah. What kind of actual control do you think that you can exert that's meaningful over the executives who are just going to enrich themselves? I think, I don't think that there's a basic collective action problem there, right? I mean, that's one way of selling it to economists. If you say something like collective action problem, they'll be like, "Ooh, that's jargon I know." That's jargon I know. I mean, Tim Harford argues this in, I think it's his book, The Logic of Life. He argues that shareholder capitalism is essentially a collective action problem, which I don't think he uses it to argue for like socialism or whatever. He's pretty mainstream, but it's an interesting argument, right? And so it's like there's a knowledge problem. I mean, there's a Hayekian argument, right? The Hayekian. Are you familiar with Hayek's argument?
In name.
But okay, the use of knowledge in society. Knowledge that we need in order to run our economic machine does not exist at the top-down level. It exists in a fragmented and dispersed form among every single individual, among every single organization. And I, in the past, have used
like a market signals type argument.
Okay. It's used in favor of markets because Hayek's an Austrian libertarian economist, but you can use it to argue for workplace democracy. Who knows a job the best? How many people have a boss that comes in and they're like, "Oh, do it like this," and you're like, "You don't know what the fuck you're talking about." You know what I mean? Like, a boss who puts together a plan for you and you're like, that doesn't work at all. I mean, you have my favorite example of work to rule strikes, right? I love work to rule strikes. They're so funny and they're so French as well. But like the French taxi drivers who just be like, right, okay, we're not going to stop working. We're going to do exactly what you say to the letter. And quelle surprise, everything stops working, right? Because every single job requires a large degree of tacit knowledge and improvisation and practical skills that you cannot see from the top down. And that's why workers should have control because they know the most about their jobs, right?
Yeah.
And so therefore I don't think that outsiders who happen to have money or who want to invest money should have that type of control. So that's not banning the stock market, but that's the best case I can make against shareholder capitalism as we currently have it.
Yeah, no, I think that's really useful. Actually, reminds me that when I spoke with Economist, he brought up the People's Republic of Walmart,
Yeah.
and how in it they illustrate that point exactly, right? Like, not only is Walmart a great example of central planning, but you could actually get rid of a lot of the inefficiencies within it by having much more workers say in the business processes and operations, because they're making all these top-down decisions that are completely uninformed with what actually happens at like the level of work, and not in these like layers and layers and layers of command and control structures in management. And so I think it's a great point, and I will look more into. I do really think that there's that maybe that like central planning large corporation kind of critique is underutilized in terms of these discussions, and pointing out those sorts of inefficiencies, and so maybe that's a good way to approach it. I will have to somehow still find a way to bridge that to the stock market. But what I'm really, I think, learning from this conversation is I think both of us potentially need more depth. Me more than you. I think you're still better off than me in this respect, but more depth in my understanding of the market the stock market itself, because I have some intuitive understanding of how it works based on my own experience, but I haven't gone deep into like the discussions around its existence and critiques of it, partially because I just don't know how prevalent that sort of talk is within society right now, and within economics and other intellectual disciplines.
It's funny actually, because it's not that difficult to turn your everyday person against finance, and maybe that's one reason that actually comparatively we're kind of lazy here, because it's like you just sort of bankers, boo, right? Like, what I mean? It's not hard, right? I mean, maybe that's a good avenue for a left critique, right? But nobody likes bankers. Nobody, everyone thinks the stock market, vaguely thinks it's a bit of a scam. There's a bit from Trevor Noah, the comedian, where he talks about this. It was just after Musk bought Twitter, and he was like going on about how the stock market just seems like a scam, and like all the time they're like, oh yeah, the market moved loads, but actually it was because we all misread an announcement by the Fed, and Trevor Noah was like, what, all of you at the same time, you all misread it in exactly the same way, and the market crashed, right? And you're the people that should be doing the investment, right? Like, you know what I mean? It's like, it's kind of silly, right? So I think it's not that hard to make the point rhetorically, but of course, you are right. I think it's we always said there's a thing with critics of mainstream economics, was that you actually have to know it better than they do. And you have to be able to point to really detailed theoretical flaws in the system that they haven't considered. And I think you could say something similar about capitalism, right? I mean, this is what Adam Tooze does so well, again, to mention him, because it is really important to have that thorough knowledge, even if you're even if you feel like you're learning Latin to understand the Catholic Church, even if that's the feeling you get, which is not entirely inaccurate, but like you've got to do it, and that's the most effective critic. I mean, it was I forget his name, but in the 15th century, because doctors didn't used to talk to patients, in sort of the medieval era, they were very, sort of top down, I'm an expert, I'm just going to saw your leg off, it doesn't matter what you say, kind of thing. And there was a guy who was a doctor, and he was trained in medicine, but you had to speak Latin to know medicine then. It was only in Latin, and he learned it, and then he just went to town on the doctors and went in on them, and he was like, you guys are completely incompetent, you're doing the wrong thing, you need to learn to communicate with patients, blah blah blah. I think he called them painted monkeys or something, but I forget his name. But he's a guy I aspire to follow, because I think that is an amazing critique, and he did have an impact. And I think doctors did start actually communicating with their patients what they were doing to them. It'd be nice if
mean,
economists could do something like that too.
I mean, talk about missed information signals in the Hayekian
Yeah.
sense, right? Like
Yeah.
you're not talking to the and so and I think I've heard you talk about this. Then that so you'd consider yourself. I mean, I know you're pluralist, but also it sounds like you're interested in post-Keynesian type, like let's actually go talk to real people and see how this thing's like working in the field. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, you could call me an institutionalist. Somebody called me an
Okay.
institutionalist about a year ago, and I was like, maybe I am, because I'm very interested in learning about laws. And I mean, there's The Code of Capital by Katharina Pistor is a really good book, which is about the legal protections that make up capital, that are capitalism essentially, right? Whether that's kind of how tax laws change when you become a company, or limited liability and things like that, right? And just the fact that property is protected indefinitely. It's not handed up by God. It's not always been the case, So corporations used to be temporary, right, for a specific purpose. Now they're permanent, right? So all of those laws, they make up capitalism, and that's the type of thing I really like, that kind of institutional understanding, because it's a bit less arcane, and again, the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, or some of the Marxist jargon, or the mainstream economics jargon as well. I don't really like it. Institutionalism basically just seems to me to be the historical approach to economics, to say this is what happened. We know that now. What's going on here? How can we learn from it? How can we improve it? Now, I think it so happens that an institutionalist understanding will lead you to a post-Keynesian understanding, because post-Keynesians do essentially get the mechanics of capitalism right. They're a little bit more interested in modeling it than I am mathematically, in abstracting. I prefer to keep it historical, but they are also institutionalists in that sense, right? So that's why that's what I subscribe to broadly.
That's really interesting. Yeah, it's always when you operate outside of a particular discipline, mapping out the interior of it and how the different kind of schools of thought interact, and the history of it is really really important to, I think, gaining a broader perspective and way to interact, even if you're not going to go to if you're not going to go to school for economics. Like if I come here and speak with you and I'm not familiar with some of these illusions you might be making, or other schools you might be gesturing at, it creates a less rich dialogue and less productive. So I'm always interested to kind of understand what landscape people are kind of living in. In terms of this is a total non sequitur, but it's vaguely related. You mentioned MMT earlier, and maybe this is just another question I have for you. Because my view of MMT, tell me where I'm wrong here. My view has always been, my understanding, and I'm forgetting the woman who kind of was a big pioneer of. Yeah. And so I've seen a few interviews with her and read a little bit about of her work. I haven't gone deep in it, but her argument to me seems to be like, look, debt, like fiat debt, represents money circulating in the economy, right? The government's debts is money that is out there actually exchanging hands and being used. And basically that, in the sense, like anytime you have unemployment, there's no way you're running your economy at the red line, right? There's room for additional projects. And so why not turn up the spigot a little bit, put more cash out into circulation, and utilize it for, projects that are beneficial, public works, infrastructure, green energy, stuff like that. And that you only need to start worrying about inflation when you're not taxing the money you're putting in back in the right ways. Like that's kind of your brakes, not like interest rates, but literally tax levels, to not let the money kind of pool in ways that would raise prices. And as long as you're not kind of overheating things, you're not trying to you're not like at capacity, right? You don't have everyone working. You've all got all the machinery in play, and you're trying to crank it up even more. That could be a problem as well. What is like, what am I missing with that, or what are the arguments against that sort of view of MMT? Especially since I think a lot of your thinking I really resonate with. So I'm really keen to hear what you take issue with that.
I don't take issue with most of that, or maybe even all of it. That's not where my difficulty lies. So I can tell you. I mean, I can tell you where some people take issue with that. And I think it's funny. Central Banking 101 by Joseph Wang. He literally mentions this. He has a box on MMT because it's such a it's become such a big deal now, and he basically acknowledges that the reason that central banks don't, or he thinks maybe shouldn't do that. Or actually, well, the reason that we shouldn't take put the power of central bank financing into the hands of democratically elected governments, right? In the way that Kelton is saying to utilize spare resources. The reason we should detach it from normal monetary policy, which is very much independent. It's arm's length from the government. It's about managing inflation and employment using interest rates and other tools increasingly, right? It's a technocratic exercise. Now he thinks that it's absolutely right on an economic level almost that you can print money to spend on infrastructure projects. You can. Absolutely. And I actually don't think any honest participant in this debate would deny that. But he thinks that, and this goes back to quite well-known mainstream macroeconomic models, it's not credible. It's not credible, and it would increase inflation, or at least people would believe that inflation was going to remain tethered to some kind of target for as long as the government had control over the central bank, control over the new money that was issued in such a direct way. So it's essentially a kind of an issue, a political issue of credibility, right? It's not that you can't do that, you can, but it's like I don't know how, it's kind of like a rule, right? It's a rule that you commit to, like a constitution, right? It's like, even I think the most diehard advocates of the Constitution would be like, okay, I can imagine a case where violating the Constitution would be a good thing, a specific thought experiment or whatever. Maybe taking a Second Amendment, taking a gun away from this group of people. Actually, that's going to produce good outcomes. But we stick to the Constitution because overall that's the best rule, right? And so in that sense, independent central banking is kind of like an economic constitution. It's like, we've got to commit to this. Otherwise, we risk inflation taking off, or at least people believing, investors in particular, right? And the markets, right? Believing that inflation is going to take off. And Joseph Wang says that like explicitly in slightly more technocratic language, but he does say that, and I think that is the mainstream argument. Now, I think that's completely wrong, and I don't think they're particularly good at managing inflation anyway. And not to berate you, buffet you with too many ideas, but my issue with MMT is not that they're descriptively wrong about that. It's not even about some of the policies that they advocate. Increased infrastructure investment, Green New Deal, whatever. I don't like them, firstly. Going back to online cults, I don't like them. I'm going to say it, and I mean that in an online sense. I don't know about them as individuals. I've never met them. I mean the cult of MMT. Sounds like a cult. The podcast should do an episode on that, actually. So I don't like them. Same reason I don't like the online Marxists. Same reason I don't like the online libertarians or whatever. But I also, their policy of a job guarantee, I really don't like. And they say that's the way to tether inflation. And I think it's politically really bad. It's workhouses. I don't want the state guaranteeing a low income employment to everybody. That's not what I want. I want a UBI. That's much more liberal in the good sense of the word. That gives people freedom. I don't want the state saying you have to do this thing. Who do you think is going to be negatively affected? How do you think African Americans are going to be treated by that system? You know what I mean? Versus just having a bank account with $1,000 a month in it. There's so much scope for discrimination. And I also don't understand how it would tether inflation. That's their policy for tethering inflation. And I don't quite get it. Having a low income job, right? So what if there's just inflation in the sector outside of the job guarantee? Which is exactly what we've just had. I don't think it helps at all. I don't understand why they think it helps. I mean, maybe this is my problem. Maybe I need to investigate it more. But that's an example of where MMTers have the right framework, but sometimes the policy I'm not so much of a fan of.
Yeah, the job. So they have to think that because everyone would be employed, that inflation would be somehow
it would prevent
under
wage
control.
Price spiral, or
because you could specifically, like, you could dial in anyone who's being employed through like some MMT program. You could basically you could adjust their wages or something to
but it wouldn't
inflation.
It wouldn't apply to everyone, right? Because they're not talking about a nationalized economy. They're talking about a guarantee, right? So it's like welfare now. It's a welfare system.
Right.
But then if you've got, say, the welfare, say job guarantee is car production, and the non-job guarantee economy is, tablet production, right? Just for simplicity. What if there's just a massive wage price spiral in the tablet production sector? What's the car production sector going to do about that? And Matt Brunig's somebody who's written about this, by the way. I'm basically just channeling him, but I don't get it. And it's not, to be clear, that's not the only thing MMTers say they do to address inflation. And I agree with some of their other what's been called supply side progressivism, which is like investing in childcare, investing in infrastructure and so on to reduce costs, expanding solar panels and stuff like that. Definitely, completely agree with them on that. So that's not all they do. I just don't understand how the job guarantee helps, and I don't like it politically. And a lot of them seem really, really pro job guarantee and really anti-UBI, and I'm like, well, a job guarantee is just a UBI with a job attached to it. Like, what?
Why not just give the people the money to make sure that they have a minimum standard? I mean, I think some sort. I don't know. I think this is from all the thinkers that I draw influence from. A UBI is in some form just gonna have to happen. I mean, there's I don't know if the economy, frankly, will survive at some point. I used to be very, I still am. I was very interested in automation and the effect of, especially being in software, right? The effect of automation and technological unemployment, and that is like a long-standing debate that goes back through several hundred years of discussion alongside the Industrial Revolution. And the short version is like there's always this fear that automation is going to put everyone out of a job, and it's never happened. People find people find ways to flow into other forms of work. So you get rid of telephone plugboard operators, and they flow somewhere else. The problem is we're getting to the point with automation where we're going to have massive disruption. I mean, it may not happen in the next decade, but in the next 100 years, I feel like it's inevitable. And at that point, like, really, when, like, I don't know, there just will probably not be enough work to go around. Right? Not in a meaningful sense. And so you're going to have to institute something like that. And my only concern with the UBI is obviously it's the common concern. And I think similarly, like, as you don't necessarily love some of the potential political impacts on people, I think the Black Americans example is that's excellent. I have similar concerns with UBI, right? It opens the door to other universal welfare programs. This is my fragile American welfare system that exists. Like, I want to protect it at all costs, and a UBI to me really sounds like a great way for Republicans to say, like, well, why do we even need Medicare and Medicaid? We can just get rid of them.
It's funny because we have the universal credit here in the UK, which was implemented by the Tories, and it was very much a replacement for existing welfare. And universal credit is a bit like UBI in the sense that it was like, instead of having all these different benefits, we've just got one. But it's horrible. People, I mean, people who have disabilities and whatever they have died during the transition. They've been treated terribly by the state. And I mean, it's kind of an on the one hand, it's kind of an ever-present problem. It's like whatever policy we take, conservatives are going to turn it into something horrible. It doesn't matter if it's UBI or a job guarantee, right?
Absolutely.
So, you know, they're going to find a way to turn it into something horrible for sure. It doesn't matter if it was like, you know, give everyone flowers. The flowers would like eat people or something. But like, it's just like, so that's true of everything. But then, yeah, it does that in an anti-welfare political culture that does worry me. And in the US, what's UBI? UBI is going to be a net reduction in the amount 100%. Of funds available to most disadvantaged people.
Effectively, like the quality of service care or whatever they get through food stamps, Medicare, Medicaid, everything will not be seen in a UBI. And even if it was, the problem is those sectors will immediately be ripped through with privatization, right? Like, so even then, the government's going to give them probably less money to go pay, you know, private individuals for lower quality probably services. So it's just that's a nightmare. But what I would emphasize, and I try to make a habit of not reading chat doing this, but I did I saw a few things that I wanted to say, like I think the real answer here is like, it's not or, it's and, right?
Yeah,
like
sure.
we need all of the welfare. We need like apparatus intact, strong, healthy, secure. That means housing, that means food, that means, you know, all of these education, healthcare, all of these fundamental basic necessities that there's no reason we should ration out to anyone. We should build the capacity to service everyone in all of these dimensions. And then on top of that, like, even then, I still think you should get, you know, $1,000 or whatever a month in your bank, so you can go out and buy nice stuff on a market. Like, there's no downside to that in my mind. Now, people are going to say, this is especially in America, this is where you start. You know, people will absolutely start frothing at the mouth, talking about human nature, and it's going to make people lazy, and they're not going to want to do work, and welfare queens, and blah blah blah. So that's our own kind of nightmare over here that we're going to have to deal with. Socialism with American characteristics is going to have to be finely tuned to really address this like ingrained, you know, American identity that has all these weird facets to it, like thinking that people are just inherent. Like, you look around and everyone wants a good quality job and they want a fulfilling job, and then but the ideology here is like people are lazy and awful and antisocial. It's really strange.
The unspecified class of people who are just gonna somehow bankrupt society by, you know, with their $50 a week or whatever it is that they get on.
I'm like, hey, even if they don't want to work, I don't care, because they're gonna go and they're gonna buy a pizza from the shop down the street, you know, every Thursday. And the people who really like pizza, who will be working there, are gonna have paying customers. Like, I don't really, like, I just don't think the collapse of society will be facilitated by giving people a little bit of money and stable housing and stability. What it will do is it will massively increase the power distribution in the favor of workers. It will eliminate practically the mechanisms for capital to discipline labor through, you know, food stamps. Like, like, we might have to crank those down a few notches. We have too many people on unemployment, right? We need to attach food stamps to a work requirement, right? You need to be actively searching for work or working to receive food stamps. You need to be drug tested. You need to, like, all of these things. It's a way to extract even more out of already suffering people. You know, it's a way to wring the cloth even harder. And it's so people, you know, I think, again, kind of a more meta point here, but people make these arguments and then don't understand why there's pushback. And I think connecting the dots, right? Like, why are people against a UBI? Why are people against decommodifying housing? there's reasons, and we need to understand those reasons, because if you just do this weird essentialization dance where you say, well, they're just assholes and I don't like them and they're evil and we should bring out the guillotines, like we're back at square one basically. So yeah, it's got to be all of the above, and we have to understand where the opposition is coming from.
Yeah, it's really tricky because there's so much evidence that UBI doesn't do that. Like, as in, literally, I would say it's weirdly one of the most consistent literatures I've ever seen. The labor supply, as they call it, doesn't decline with payments, and they can be big payments, they can be small payments, they can be permanent, they can be temporary one-offs. People just start doing stuff, with the possible exception of like single mums who go and, well, that obviously mothering a child is doing things, but like they're not paid employment. I mean, right? People still do paid employment, and it's just like, but at the same time, the average person just doesn't listen to you when you say that. Well, statistically, they're actually blah blah blah. Like they're not listening. I don't know. Like I mean, one thing to say is like, what would you do if you got a universal basic income? Do you think you carry on working, or
100%?
What do you say that to people?
I would, yeah. I mean, I think that's a great point. And bringing it back to personalizing these sorts of arguments is so critical, because I think most people would be like, well, I would move jobs, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I would, maybe I could afford to actually use my vacation time to go somewhere nice, and I would actually do that instead of pocketing everything away trying to save for a house, something along those lines. But yeah, I think very few people would just be like, well, I really just want to exist as a vegetable, on a couch, plugged into cable news all day. I don't think that's a very fulfilling.
That works when you're a teenager, and when you are, and for like 3 days if you're an adult, and then you just start to feel like unwell. The other case is if you're actually ill, if you're unwell, if you're depressed, or if you're physically, ill, in which case, you need the money to live and deal with that problem, right? But most, you just can't do it. You cannot not do anything for that long. It's not human nature. I hate to say it.
Human nature argument. That's a whole like. Again, there's so many. I'm gonna have to watch this back. There's so many like video. I don't want to be a video essayist, but I think so many of these topics need to be really like. Again, we need this playbook, and the human nature argument is like such. We need counters to that. It's so pervasive and so toxic, and so like amorphous and hard to. If someone just says, well, I just think it's human nature that all people are greedy and awful. Like, okay, well, we're not having a conversation anymore. You're stating this, and it's a way to. Basically, you're at an impasse. One thing you said though is, when you tell people, when you ask them like, what would you do, or you show them the empirics about a UBI and its effects, I think you're right that like everyday people maybe don't care about the empirics. But what I would say is, I think the other problem is like when you go to the economists, right, the like hegemonic section of high priests, and show them the evidence. The charter, like the constitution point that you made earlier, is like exactly what comes into play, because I think they would even, I don't know if you've tried this, but I would anticipate if you gave them the evidence, they would say, well, it doesn't matter because it's against like the ethos of a free market, blah, blah, blah. And we just can't do it. And that is like such a core, like the kind of kernel of their efficacy in advocating for not doing these things and preventing progress and keeping the status quo. And I had never thought of it the way that you put it. So it's interesting that you think to me, it almost feels like saying them quite apart out loud with the people who critique MMT in that way. Like, we just can't do it because it's kind of against the rules.
Yeah.
Because like, it's like, well, what are the rules? Let's talk about the rules, because the rules kind of sound a little like screwed up, and we need to fix those.
Well, that's what MMT has achieved. It's exposed. Right. It's exposed that, and it's that for that reason, I have a love-hate relationship with it. I think it's actually, funnily enough, it's actually a great political project. As much as it is economically right about the fundamentals, it's a great political project. They've done more to push forward any type of heterodox economics than any other group of heterodox economists, right? And now it's like kind of Biden policy, MMT-ish type stuff. And I enjoy watching mainstreamers be like, no, it's actually mainstream economics. We were always saying this, but they always do that. It's just cope. But like, so, you know, they've been really successful in that regard. I do, by the way, I've got to go soon because I need to, well, in fact, probably now because I need to make myself food. It's 7 p.m.
No worries. I really appreciate you spending so much time.
No, I've really enjoyed this chat though.
Good. I hope we can do it again at some point in the future.
Oh yeah, sure, of course. Do you want to like give one final plug to your channel and share?
I would love to.
Yeah.
So you can find me on YouTube at Jacob Online. I think there's some links around in the chat somewhere. So please head over and give me maybe a subscription rather than checking out. You can check out what I have there already. It's 3 kind of rough debate reviews, but I promise there'll be more. This is a very kind of new thing for me. Hopefully you found it interesting and engaging. And if you want to see more conversations like this between me and others, more debate reviews, debates, and eventually some original, I don't want to say video essays, but some original content and thoughts as well, and are ultimately aligned with the kind of political project that I mentioned earlier. Please come check it out. I really appreciate the support.
Yeah, please. So go and check Jacob's channel out. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. All right, I'll drop off and I might shoot you a DM in a bit.
Yeah. See you later.
All right, thanks.
Yo. It's just me and all of you. How do you feel about that? For anyone who is remotely interested in watching me, but I don't say that much, I'm playing Baldur's Gate 3 this week on Thursday. But I stream it to my live channel and to Twitch, not to the main channel because I don't stream gaming stuff to there. I'll be around on Thursday, 2 p.m. BST, if you want to watch. If not, I'll see you next time for the next stream/conversation. Thanks for joining, everyone. There were some really interesting comments in chat, as well as some not so interesting ones. But you take the rough with the smooth. All right, love you all. Peace out. I'm never doing that again.